Chapter 1991. Maybe it was not time yet. The entrance of the imperial palace had not been opened. And during this period of time, Han Fei didn't know whether it was a hunting feast for all the half-kings who came to the imperial palace or a hunting feast for the native creatures here, but there was bound to be a crazy fight. After everyone left, Han Fei wandered deeper. Han Fei was wondering if he would encounter other powerhouses in the Pioneer Sea State from the Immortal Palace, the 100 Demons clan, or the Seabed Human clan here. Because these people were confident of their strength, they tended to approach the center. And the closer to the center, the greater the chance of encountering them. At least Han Fei thought so. As for where the center of this sea area was, he only needed to look at the surrounding environmental colors. In the environment, the more red there was, the redder the background color, and the closer it was to the center. Han Fei didn't even think about it and directly rushed thousands of kilometers away. However, as soon as Han Fei's figure appeared, he saw a swish of black poisonous stings shooting at him. Han Fei glanced at it. It was just an advanced Venerable Realm sea urchin. How dare it attack him at such a low level? Han Fei didn't even bother to pay attention to it. How could an advanced Venerable Realm cultivator understand the speed of a Pioneer Sea State? Humph! With a cold snort from Han Fei, a terrifying pressure surged, and the sea urchin was directly crushed into a pancake, and even its soul and body exploded. It couldn't be more dead. Han Fei didn't care. He just thought that the abnormal movement of the Imperial Palace had some kind of power effect on these marine creatures, making them go crazy. They could feel his terror before, but now they couldn't feel it anymore? In fact, it was as Han Fei expected. He didn't know if it was because these creatures were too excited, but even facing Han Fei, some creatures still dared to choose to attack. Of course, they attacked selectively, not all of them. Maybe some creatures were too excited and had already gone crazy, so they attacked Han Fei. However, none of these creatures that would take the initiative to attack Han Fei were at the Half-King realm. Maybe he hadn't encountered them, or maybe the Half-King realm had a certain degree of self-awareness. Anyway, after Han Fei went 1,000,000 kilometers deeper into this place, he killed at most a dozen creatures along the way. He found that the deeper he went, the fewer creatures that would take the initiative to attack him. At this moment, a foot-long crab lay under Han Fei's feet. The overall color of the environment he was in was already slightly red, which meant that the colorful colors from earlier had mostly disappeared. The rest of the colors were mostly red or similar. The brightness of the colors was low, and the overall appearance was very dim. It gave off the feeling of a neon city in the fog. In the depths of the Red Mist Sea, there were many complicated rock walls that could be described as grotesque and jagged rocks. Holding the navigator, Han Fei searched for the most suitable entrance for himself. However, the nautical panorama didn't move. Seeing this, Han Fei curled his lips and sat cross-legged. There was no point in searching blindly before the entrance appeared. As for the central region, he should have already reached it. As for why he hadn't met any other kings, it was possible that they hadn't even entered the central region. It was also possible that there was no way to sense them here, so they simply hadn't met each other. In fact, outside the Red Mist Sea. At this moment, the half-monarchs of the celestial palaces of the 36 profound skies were entering. During the exploration of the Arch Palace, it was impossible for them to stick together. Even if they wanted to stick together, now was not the time. Instead, inside the Arch Palace, they would stick together in the form of humans, sea demons, mermaids, and sea humans. At this moment, the only thing everyone had to do was to find the entrance. Therefore, the major ships of the 36 profound heavens were relatively scattered. Because this time, not only were there half-monarchs entering the Arch Palace, but also many palace masters were also entering the Arch Palace. For example, when the Snow Lady came to the Red Mist Sea, she didn't stop at all and directly shouted, "Everyone, follow me." After entering the Red Mist Sea, disperse and look for the entrance. Yes, Your Majesty. In the 10,000 Poison Heaven, Huang Jia also led the half-monarchs into the Red Mist Sea. They heard Huang Jia say, "All of you listen to this prince. There are many strange poisons here, but you must not be greedy. The purpose of your trip is not to collect poisons, but to become monarchs. Once you reach the sea expansion realm, you will have 100,000 years or even longer to study poisons. You must distinguish your priorities. Thus, ancestral patriarch. And the other group of people on the Grand Pure Wuji's side was much more powerful. The Grand Pure Wuji set off with the Golden Crow, the Dream-Weaving Immortal Palace, the Five Elements Immortal Palace, and the Berserk Corpse Immortal Palace. Nominally, the Grand Pure Wuji, as the leader of the 36 Profound Heavens, took care of the other immortal palaces, just to make these immortal palaces submit to them. In fact, once they entered the Red Mist Sea, they would still go their separate ways. Only when these people entered the Arch Palace would they have a chance to gather again. But this method was extremely undesirable in the eyes of some independent immortal palaces. The treasures and resources were limited, and the immortal palace was so dangerous. Who would get the resources if they got them? They seemed to be in harmony now, but no one knew whether they would be in harmony when the time came. Wu Duoshuo of the Grand Pure Palace, Li Xinghen of the Wuji Heaven, these seed-type powerhouses were very likely to become monarchs, and each of them carried precious treasures with them. This time, they ignored Han Fei and had no intention of hunting him here. Even Bei Luochen didn't have this idea, because the scope of this Red Mist Sea was too large. Who knew where Han Fei would go? Even if their perception range was large, they could find Han Fei. But so what? They had seen Han Fei's speed more than once or twice. On the side of the 100 demons and the human clan at the bottom of the sea. The leader of the kings almost said the same thing. Anyone who enters the Arch Palace doesn't need to fight fearlessly. The only thing you need to consider is how to become a monarch. Becoming a monarch is more important than anything else. In the dark, squads of rogue cultivators and half-monarchs often rushed in from various directions of the Red Mist Sea. Some extremely strange humanoid creatures were also rushing in. If Han Fei were here, he would definitely recognize them. Aren't they the Behemoth clan? On the side of the Mermaid royal family, Xia Hongzhu stood quietly outside the Red Mist Sea. Her power passed through the red mist and collided with an invisible force in the depths of the Red Mist Sea. A violent tide immediately swept across the Red Mist Sea. On the surface of the sea, furious waves surged to the sky. Xia Hongzhu couldn't help but withdraw her power. She said, "I can't tell what kind of power it is, but it's not necessarily a living creature. It seems that the Arch Palace is real, and it's quite difficult to enter. I suspect that even a pioneer sea realm cultivator can't explore the Arch Palace and control the treasures there." Chen Huangdian said, "I don't know. I've never been there." Li Qingdi said, "It's indeed dangerous inside. The last time I entered, I encountered a severed hand. At that time, I thought that I was the strongest pioneer sea realm cultivator, but I barely escaped from that hand and almost died." Xia Hongzhu couldn't help but look at Li Qingdi. "A severed hand?" Li Qingdi nodded. "Yes. A severed hand that can be attached to other people." While Xia Hongzhu was slightly stunned, a large ship came in scrupulously. It was a warship of the Martial Emperor City. King Wu stood at the bow of the ship, but before he said anything, a king had already roared, "All half-monarchs, follow me into the Red Mist Sea." King Wu didn't seem to be too bothered. He simply looked at Xia Hongzhu from afar. When King Wu saw Xia Hongzhu, he narrowed his eyes and nodded at her. "It's an honor to meet you, Your Holiness, the War Queen." "Do you know me?" Chen Huangdian looked at King Wu and said unhurriedly, "This is King Wu. He built the Martial Emperor City and suppressed the chaotic sea on his own. Nobody in this world is a match for him." Xia Hongzhu slightly nodded and then said, "If you hadn't wasted 100,000 years, you wouldn't be weaker than him." After the half-king realm powerhouses of the various forces entered this place, one of them died in just 100 breaths of time. This one died in the thunder-fire heaven. Looking at the jade slip in his hand, Lei Qing secretly cursed, "I told you to be careful, you bastard." In the Red Mist Sea. As Han Fei expected, more than 4,000 people had broken in at this moment. As the independent cultivators and the people from the Martial Emperor City joined them, it was only a matter of time before the number exceeded 5,000. There was no telling whether those people were hunting or being hunted at this moment. they didn't have a target. All they knew was to charge into the depths of the red mist sea. Some were lucky on their way and didn't run into any half-monarchs. Some were unlucky enough to see through their disguises and were killed on the spot. For example, there was a prawn demon who was vigilant and holding a spear that was full of energy. He crossed a winding grassland and killed a sea urchin, a centipede, and an octopus. Just when he thought that there was no danger around him, he temporarily stopped on a colorful stone pillar. Suddenly, a black light directly covered him. The prawn soldier didn't even know how he died. If he were still alive, he would have seen a certain part of the grassland that he had passed bearing its fangs and claws. It was clearly a seaweed centipede. The centipede was still chewing in its mouth. There were many situations like this. Han Fei, on the other hand, waited for more than 6 hours before the nautical panorama was finally activated. Chapter 1992. Following the navigator, Han Fei came to a weird place. There was a crack on the ground that was no more than a kilometer long and about 7 or 8 meters wide, which was very inconspicuous. Even a casual slash from Han Fei would be much larger than this, so even if someone noticed it under normal circumstances, they wouldn't necessarily go deep into it. But the navigator was pointing to this place, and Han Fei dove into it without hesitation. As soon as he went down 100 meters, he saw that the rock walls on both sides were dark red. However, on the dark red rock walls, there were also some weird greenish-yellow shimmers. After descending less than a kilometer, suddenly, a snake head crawled out of the rock wall. To be exact, it didn't look like a snake, but more like deadwood at the bottom of the sea. If Han Fei hadn't seen its information, he would have thought that a stone pillar had smashed at him. In Han Fei's eyes, information popped up. Name Bloody Rock Python Introduction. It lives in a bloody place and is corroded by the filthy blood all year round. It grows very fast, but it also dies very fast. It may only have a lifespan of more than 500 years. Its blood contains poison. If you are infected, you may lose your vitality, rot your body, or melt your blood. It's not to be underestimated. Level 89 Quality Legendary Level Half King contains chaotic energy greater than 48 strands, battle techniques, blood explosion, dimensional swallowing, bloody soul devouring, collectible, blood poison, soul devouring eye. Han Fei slashed his saber backhandedly. The saber light illuminated the place, and the pressure of a king slashed down. How could a mere half-king resist it? After one slash, the bloody rock python was directly minced into pieces, and the void lines quickly locked it down to absorb the chaotic energy. Because the bloody rock python could only live for 500 years, Han Fei didn't think it was a big deal that it had little chaotic energy. It could become a half-king in 500 years. He didn't know whether it was because of its talent or because of the unique environment here. Also, what kind of blood was the so-called filthy blood? Was the red color of this entire area actually tainted with a kind of blood color? After quickly absorbing the chaotic chi of this bloody light rock python, Han Fei did not think too much about it and continued to fly deeper. Another 1,000 meters or so, a transparent thorn grass suddenly emitted a red light. Every leaf had 7 sharp thorns, and the countless leaves came at him together, just like the big red trunk he had encountered before. With a thought in Han Fei's mind, the infinity water turned into thousands of knives, and wherever the knives passed, the thorn celery was all shattered. However, the thorn celery seemed to be just a beginning. Han Fei seemed to have turned on a switch for himself. After completely crushing it, the strange Buddha's tentacles, the red lava explosion fruit, and the blood-red stone moth's water caterpillar appeared. Almost in the blink of an eye, several powerful creatures attacked Han Fei. These attacks were all completed in an instant because before he encountered them, he had no idea where they were or how they would attack. They were all temporary responses that Han Fei made at the moment of the attack. Of course, with Han Fei's strength, no matter how well these creatures disguised themselves or how powerful their attacks were, they couldn't work. Although these creatures didn't have a long lifespan, they still contained some chaotic chi. After this wave of attacks, Han Fei's chaotic chi soared. In just half an hour, Han Fei had more than 50,000 strands of chaotic chi. Yes, in terms of the amount of chaotic chi, Han Fei had almost caught up with the amount of chaotic chi when the old turtle opened the sky. Although Han Fei didn't know how much chaotic chi people like Bei Luochen and He Daoyuan had when they opened the sky, it shouldn't be a lot. But he wasn't sure. If they slowly absorbed the chaotic chi over time, they might have at least 40,000 or 50,000 strands. Half an hour later, Han Fei didn't know how far he had gone, but there were fewer and fewer normal creatures that attacked him. Han Fei sensed the strong blood chi. Even he felt that this blood chi was not good. It was trying to drill into his body. How could Han Fei let them do that? The surface of his body was shining with a golden light, which was repelling the bloody chi all the time. Pop, as if some kind of barrier had been broken, the strange and disgusting creatures around him disappeared almost instantly. Or he got rid of them. However, this place was not a good place to be. Han Fei saw stone pillars of different shapes that looked like the Gobi Desert one after another. But here, not only was the bloody chi strong, but there was also a lot of death energy. Undead creatures? Han Fei was stunned. In such a dense atmosphere of death, it was impossible for there to be no undead creatures. As soon as Han Fei stood still, he saw spirals appearing one after another around the neon rock wall. But these spirals were not whirlpools in the water. Han Fei saw soul shadows one after another. Swoosh, like a sharp arrow, it shot straight at Han Fei. When the spiral shot over, Han Fei felt that this thing was actually nailing directly to his soul. However, no matter how strong these spirals were, they were only at the half-king realm, so they were still ineffective against him. Han Fei even caught a spiral that passed by him. He took a closer look, and information appeared in his eyes. Name: Sea Soul Cone Snail, Undead Creature. Introduction: The sea soul cone snail is corroded by the undead energy and gradually turns into an undead creature. Its body is twisted like a sea leech, which can attack the soul. Once touched by it, the soul will be easily damaged. Level 89 Quality: Exotic Realm, Half-King Realm, contains 58 strands of undead energy. Combat Technique: Spiral Soul Piercing, Collectible, None, Unabsorbable. Han Fei was speechless. The creatures at the Half-King Realm were ugly, but they were alive. But this one didn't even have chaotic energy. It was purely a waste of his time. The infinity water barely formed a blade barrier in front of Han Fei, pushing forward all the way. Bam, bam, bam. Wherever it passed, the neon rock wall and the sea soul cone snails were collapsing. None of them could escape the strangulation range of the infinity water. However, this was not the end. This kind of sea soul cone snail was just a very ordinary creature. Because it was born in this special place, it could reach the terrifying strength of the Half-King Realm. If it weren't for this special place, even if these conches were given 5,000 years to cultivate, even if they could reach the Half-King Realm, there wouldn't be so many of them now. But behind these conches, there were even more dangerous creatures. They were densely packed insects that looked like ants. As soon as he saw them, Han Fei felt a headache. These things were just like the marching sea leeches. They were like sea leeches. They were the most terrifying. Humph! How can these ordinary creatures bear the authority of a king? At that moment, Han Fei released all his power and was surrounded by a large array. Although it was not as powerful as the Qinji Divine Ghost Coil, it was still not to be underestimated. The countless little bugs the size of a thumb were annihilated when they collided with Han Fei's protective array. In Han Fei's eyes, information jumped wildly. Name: Ghost Aphid, Undead Creature. Introduction: This is a kind of seabed aphid that was corroded by undead creatures and collectively transformed into ghost aphid. This insect has a trace of extremely rotten saliva, which can slowly nibble away even sea-quelling bizarre treasures. Level 70 Quality: Exotic Realm, Dao Seeking, contains immortal energy. 1 Wisp. Combat Skill: Ghost Aphid Feast. Collectible, None, Unabsorbable. Han Fei was speechless when he was attacked by so many weird creatures in a row. In particular, these ghost aphids were far stronger than the creatures in front of him. Even if the infinity water turned into a tornado of thousands of knives, it was impossible to completely block these ghost aphids. and the array outside Han Fei's body was almost covered by the ghost aphids in an instant. As the ghost aphids were annihilated, his hundreds of arrays were also melting at a speed visible to the naked eye. At this moment, it was a competition of endurance. He wanted to see whether these ghost aphids would be exhausted first or his spiritual energy would be insufficient to resist the devouring of the ghost aphids. Puff, 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 Han Fei's pressure and killing arrays appeared at the same time. The infinity water strangled the ghost aphids crazily, and the crack was already turbid. After half an hour, Han Fei was slightly shocked. He couldn't imagine how many ghost aphids there were. There must be hundreds of millions of them. Even he couldn't go on like this. Not to mention the crazy remodeling of arrays, the use of the infinity water would consume his soul power. Han Fei couldn't help but show a hint of pain. He raised his hands. Apocalyptic divine technique. The healing divine light descended, and the entire abyss suddenly lit up. With a sizzling sound, countless ghost aphids were purified. After Han Fei consumed more than 800 years of vitality, most of the ghost aphids here were purified. And just when Han Fei cast the healing divine light, someone passed by outside the entrance of this place. Since this person dared to appear in the deepest part and look for the entrance, he was undoubtedly in the Pioneer Sea state. The person who came was sitting with a big-headed doll on his shoulder. It was Hong Yu's spiritual beast, the Thousand Puppet. The Thousand Puppet said, "There seems to be a battle inside." Hong Yu nodded. It turns out that the more dangerous it is outside, the safer it is inside. It seems that this is not a safe place. This way is fine. I wonder who was so lucky to find this place. Let's go and have a look. Chapter 1993. Son of a bitch, I've wasted 1,000 years of my vitality just to find an entrance? Han Fei felt terrible. Although he could devour the vitality of others, he didn't feel good at all. Although he could devour the vitality of others, after he became a king, he found a problem. That was, even if he had the void lines, his vitality was not infinite. Although he could absorb vitality, there was an upper limit. Han Fei had a hunch that after absorbing vitality for more than 100,000 years, it would be extremely difficult for him to continue absorbing vitality. In other words, in addition to his own 100,000 years of vitality, he might have another 100,000 years of vitality. But now, he had already destroyed almost all of them, and that was 30,000 years. He spent 1,000 years here and another 1,000 years there. How many years had it been? He had used the Heaven Awakening divine art to consume 30,000 years of life force. If this continued, if he was allowed to stay in the chaotic Azure Sea for another few hundred years, the extra 100,000 years of life force would probably be used up just by fighting a few battles or challenging someone of a higher realm. However, Han Fei thought that this imperial palace might be the greatest opportunity in the chaotic Azure Sea. Therefore, since he had started to use the Heaven Awakening divine art, he might as well prepare 20,000 years of vitality and see if he could consume all of it. Most of the ghost aphis had been purified, and 80% of them had been annihilated. The rest either couldn't or didn't dare to approach Han Fei, which was an instinctive fear of the Heaven Awakening divine art. Han Fei thought to himself, after this pass, there shouldn't be any more danger, right? After all, the danger of the ghost aphis was high enough to shake a Pioneer Sea realm cultivator. If there were stronger creatures, Han Fei would wonder if he had come to the wrong place. However, misfortune never comes alone. Yes, Han Fei felt that this was an insect cave. After about 10 minutes, Han Fei saw that the surrounding rock walls had been covered with a thick black and red liquid like magma. In the thick magma, Han Fei saw a few long tentacles, which looked extremely weird. In Han Fei's eyes, a new kind of insect appeared. Named Juing demonic insect, mutated, introduction an ancient ferocious beast with the bloodline of Juing. It controls water and fire and swallows death energy to refine demons. Because he had been trapped here for so long, he had devoured too many strange demonic insects, causing his body to mutate, becoming a half-insect, half-beast mutated life form. The demonic insect of Juing cried like a baby, its demonic voice tainting one's soul. Palm elemental fire, ominous water. Elemental fire burning the body, fierce water rushing the soul, it was not to be underestimated. Level 92 Quality. Primeval Beast, Realm, Sea Expansion, contains chaotic energy, 4,659 wisps, battle skills, elemental fire, fierce water, crying 9 heads, collectible, tainted blood, absorbable, a sea expansion ancient beast? Han Fei's expression changed slightly. This was no ordinary king, but a primeval beast. Of course, it was still inferior to the Emperor Sparrow. Han Fei's heart skipped a beat. If that's the case, why don't we let the Emperor Sparrow do it? With a flash between Han Fei's eyebrows, the Emperor Sparrow suddenly appeared. Just as the Emperor Sparrow was getting impatient, it saw the 9-headed nascent demon bug and couldn't help but exclaim, "9-headed nascent demon? No, a mixed blood descendant?" His bloodline had actually been contaminated to such an extent. Where did you find such a thing? I can't even eat it. His body and soul have basically been contaminated. Han Fei said, "You are both primeval beasts, and you are the nemesis of the insect clan. How about I give this bug to you?" The Emperor Sparrow glanced at Han Fei. "The tainted blood is not worthy of me. You can try it yourself." Han Fei was speechless. What do you mean by the tainted blood is not worthy of you? Even if its bloodline is tainted, it is still a primeval beast. Why do you make it sound like it is an ant? At this moment, the 9-headed nascent demon bug had also sensed Han Fei and the Emperor Sparrow. Especially the Emperor Sparrow, it felt very uneasy. Yeah, instantly, there was the sound of a baby crying, but it also sounded like a baby laughing. For a moment, Han Fei couldn't tell whether the other party was crying or laughing. However, the voice echoed infinitely in this place. It was fine to listen to it once, but Han Fei felt his head hurt when he heard it 2 or 3 times. Even though Han Fei blocked his hearing, he found that the sound was directly in his soul and he couldn't avoid it. Han Fei snorted. Han Fei attacked with the Dao Convergent Sword. It was unreasonable to fight like this. When fighting an enemy, you should kill them with 1 strike. Since the 9-headed nascent demon bug didn't know what was good for it, he would just kill it. However, when Han Fei saw layers of blood tides appearing in the void to meet the Dao Convergent Sword, he couldn't help but be stunned. Is that the ominous water? Each wave of the fierce water seemed to be hundreds of millions of kilograms. When they collided with each other, this place shook violently as if it would collapse at any time. Han Fei's heart sank. The Dao Convergence Sword broke the barriers one after another, but after it destroyed the fierce water, it only cut off 1 tentacle with a puff. Han Fei saw with his own eyes that the tentacle took the initiative to roll toward the Dao Convergence Sword. Although it was smashed into pieces immediately, Han Fei's Dao Convergence Sword had consumed more than half of its power. Then, hundreds of tentacle shadows slapped at Han Fei in a row, and finally, Han Fei's Dao Unification Sword was broken. Han Fei couldn't help but frown. Although he didn't use the power of the Great Path, he was much stronger than ordinary kings now. When Han Fei was dissatisfied that he couldn't kill the enemy with 1 strike, he saw the smashed tentacle was ignited in the air. It seemed that a terrifying fire energy instantly filled the whole crack. Behind him, Hong Yu, who was chasing him, was fighting some half-dead ghost aphids with a pale face. All of a sudden, a terrifying fiery light engulfed the entire fissure. The temperature was no longer the key. The key was that the fire seemed to be burning every bit of his flesh and blood. Hong Yu couldn't help but gasp. What kind of fire is this? It seems to be burning every bit of my flesh and blood. It hurt so much. Hong Yu, who was still far away, was already in such a state. Han Fei, who was closest to it, couldn't be any better. This thing didn't seem to have much to do with the strength of his physique. It just made him feel extreme pain in a way that made him feel pain. On one hand, he felt physical pain, and on the other hand, the red tide was coming at him, which was probably mental pain. How could Han Fei bear that? Han Fei shouted, "Apocalypse Divine Technique." Although the 9-headed nascent demon bug was not an undead creature, its bloodline was too dirty, and the effect of the Apocalypse Divine Technique on it was no less than that of an undead creature. When the healing divine light fell, the nine-headed nascent demon bug screamed wildly as if it was in great pain. Han Fei grinned. Come on. Let's see who can bear it. How can a little bug like you understand what I'm doing when I'm cultivating my body? Although Han Fei felt that every inch of his skin and flesh was being torn apart, the pressure was transmitted from his body to his spirit. However, the pressure caused by this was transmitted from the body to the spirit, and it wouldn't really hurt the body. At most, it would weaken his combat power, so Han Fei was not afraid at all. Oh! The 100-beast soul-devouring roar burst out, and Han Fei slashed out with the yin-yang reincarnation knife. A dark blue light appeared in front of him, and Han Fei casually drew out the blade of time. Golden light shone on it, and he cut off 3 tentacles with one slash. Blood spurted out crazily. The Emperor Sparrow watched such a violent head-on battle quietly. Feeling that his flesh and blood were not used to it, the Emperor Sparrow glared at the 9-headed nascent demon bug, and the latter went berserk and attacked Han Fei with all its strength. Han Fei looked at the Emperor Sparrow speechlessly. Even if you don't want to help, don't make trouble. The Emperor Sparrow said, I just want you to feel the power of the prehistoric fierce beasts. Although this disgusting bug has reached the Pioneer Sea state, its power doesn't seem real. It seems to have been raised quickly, so I don't need to attack it at all. However, it doesn't mean that it's not strong. Han Fei said, I found it. If its demonic sound was several times stronger, I would have to guard my soul. Moreover, I would feel like my body is being torn apart, which would greatly affect the effect of my attack. At this moment, the 9-headed nascent demon bug's tentacles were pulled out of the magma. There were some skulls hanging on each of its tentacles, and all the sounds came from the skulls. The 9-headed nascent demon bug seemed to know that it had no way to escape, so a sharp needle protruded out of its mouth. As soon as it appeared, the surrounding seawater was dyed dark red. Han Fei didn't dare to be careless. A blue halo enveloped the area, and he slashed at the 9-headed nascent demon bug. The 9-headed nascent demon bug was instantly cut into several pieces. At this moment, the yin-yang reincarnation knife burst out at the same time, and the 9-headed nascent demon bug's soul was directly cut into pieces. Only then did Han Fei have the time to absorb the chaotic chi with the void lines. At this moment, the Emperor Sparrow and Han Fei looked back at the same time. Then, he saw a familiar figure running away. When Hong Yu saw this scene, the 1,000 puppets shouted immediately, Run! Run! It's Han Fei and his bird. In fact, when Hong Yu saw the person below was Han Fei, he directly ran away without the 1,000 puppets' reminder. That guy's strength was already beyond ordinary. No one in the Pioneer Sea state could kill him. This was the conclusion of the Martial Emperor City's intelligence. As Hong Yu ran, he thought to himself, there's a Pioneer Sea state creature at the entrance. Is there a big opportunity here? Chapter 1994. Hong Yu just remembered this place, but he didn't dare to enter it. If it was someone else, it wouldn't be a big deal, but he was so unlucky that he almost met Han Fei 3 times in a row. Most importantly, every time he met Han Fei, he saw a king die. The first time was when he went to the barbaric abyss with Huo Buli. At that time, Han Fei killed Yu Meng and Gong Zhan fled. The second time was in the Medicine King Heaven. Han Fei pretended to be the second sword god king and killed a king with 1 sword. This time, although Han Fei didn't kill a human demi-king, it was obvious that there was a Pioneer Sea realm monster that was almost killed by Han Fei. It was only a matter of time before it died. Hey, old Hong, what kind of luck do you have? Why do you always meet Han Fei? If there's another chance, let's just surrender. Hong Yu ran away in disgrace. Han Fei didn't let him down. He had already sucked up the chaotic chi of the 9-headed demon bug. Now it was already a dead bug. Han Fei moved his body and felt that the pain in his body just now was almost as painful as the heart-wrenching pain when he practiced the indestructible body art. He had to admit that even the mixed bloodline of the prehistoric ferocious beasts was not to be underestimated. Even against someone like him who could be considered as one of the top few kings in the chaotic vast sea, the 9-headed nascent demon bug was enough to reduce his battle strength by 30%. If it were an ordinary person, his combat power would probably be reduced by 50%. Besides, this 9-headed demon bug was good at soul attacks. If his soul was not strong enough, he might not be able to defeat it. At this moment, after absorbing the chaotic chi of the 9-headed demon bug, Han Fei directly threw its corpse to the back to feed the bugs. This thing's body had already been contaminated. Although it had become a king, it would never have a chance to become an emperor. When the 9-headed demon bug died, the red magma around it seemed to be fading. When Han Fei continued to go deeper into the chasm, no more creatures attacked him. After about 10 minutes, Han Fei saw a vortex gate. Shoo. When Han Fei saw the vortex gate, he was dumbfounded. He had spent so much effort to come here. In the end, he opened a black entrance for himself? Han Fei still remembered what Han Xian told him. The door was divided into 3 colors. One was blue-black, one was red, and the last one was black. Among them, it was especially emphasized that black entrances should not be entered, as they were almost a door of death. Han Fei didn't feel good at that time. Han Fei immediately took out the nautical panorama and tried again. As a result, the nautical panorama pointed at the black vortex. Han Fei didn't want to use the 9-palace ruler of Providence because the Imperial Palace was definitely dangerous, so the 9-palace ruler of Providence wouldn't end well at this time. Of course, even though he knew it, he still tested it. As a result, the 9-palace ruler of Providence displayed a form that Han Fei had never seen before. The indicator moved back and forth between great fortune and desperation. But shouldn't such a situation indicate that he's a Hellguard? How could he use such a method to move? Han Fei couldn't help but take a deep breath. Could it be that the 9-palace ruler of fortune couldn't detect the danger of the Imperial Palace and couldn't see through his luck here? Han Fei suspected that it was probably because of this reason. This meant that the 9-palace ruler of Providence also had an upper limit. As a human holy weapon, it was not a divine weapon. Logically speaking, it should be at the same level as a sea-quelling bizarre treasure, but he didn't use it for fighting. Since the 9-palace ruler of Providence had an upper limit, Han Fei didn't know if the nautical panorama had an upper limit. But after all, finding a way should be easier than measuring luck. Han Fei felt that the nautical panorama might have more usable space. Now the 9-palace ruler of Providence was useless, and the nautical panorama clearly pointed at this black vortex entrance. What could Han Fei do? Although he didn't want to enter, he still had to enter. Because no matter how dangerous this entrance was, the nautical panorama said that it was the most suitable for him. Since it was the most suitable for him, maybe he could also turn misfortune into fortune. After hesitating for a while, Han Fei gritted his teeth and decided to enter. Although Han Xian, as his uncle, had no reason to lie to him. However, there must be a reason for the black vortex entrance to exist. Besides, Han Xian also said that the more difficult it was outside the entrance, the less dangerous it was inside the entrance. Obviously, from this point of view, maybe this black vortex might not be as dangerous as he thought. Since he had made up his mind, Han Fei didn't intend to change it. Anyway, no matter which entrance he chose, he might as well enter the one that was most suitable for him. With a swish, Han Fei disappeared into the vortex. When Han Fei reappeared, the void stabilized, and Han Fei looked around immediately. This was a lush green forest. There were many strange demonic plants of various colors. There were huge pure blue flowers with white stamens that spread out in circles. There were dark green plants like feather fans, like peacocks spreading their wings to show off. There were bright red semi-arc-shaped flowers, like the shape of squid, with many tentacles wrapped in the flowers, and the tentacles looked like extended stamens. The first thing Han Fei wanted to do was to release his perception, but in fact, perception was still useless, so all he could see was what was in front of him. A forest. Han Fei shook his head slightly. It didn't look like one. Those trees didn't look like trees. The shape of the tree was strange, like a lantern, and from the leaves, a huge curved gourd hung down. There were also some trees that looked like trees, but the leaves were strange, like the broad leaves of seaweed. Han Fei didn't know what kind of tree would grow like this. Han Fei quickly calmed down. He came here to look for opportunities. Han Xian told him to take it slow and not to be too hasty. The implication was that every scene he encountered might have its own meaning. Han Fei didn't know what was here, but he still planned to call Little Black and Little White out to see if they could show him the way. Today, he had used the nautical panorama twice in this strange environment. If he couldn't pass the time of the nautical panorama safely, then he didn't need to use it. Therefore, Han Fei naturally thought of Little Black and Little White. As soon as Little Black and Little White were called out by Han Fei, Little White exclaimed, "Dad! There are so many enemies." Han Fei was dumbfounded. "Where are the enemies? Why don't I see a single one?" And at this moment, Little Black swooped over Han Fei's head, where there was a thin vine. Han Fei had seen this thin vine when it first appeared. It was hanging from a big leaf like a broad leaf above his head. It hadn't moved until now, otherwise, he would have found it. However, Little Black took a bite and broke the thin vine. Han Fei was about to ask Little Black when he became a vegetarian, when he saw that the vine was twisting. Shit! Han Fei's eyelids twitched. It was not a tree vine, nor a demonic vine, but a worm. It even had flesh and blood. Although the flesh and blood were almost dried up, the worm could still fight back. Although he couldn't see where Little Black was, the vine split into dozens in an instant and grabbed in Little Black's direction. Chomp chomp. However, Little Black's teeth were much stronger than these small vines, and they were bitten by him quickly. Anyway, as long as Little Black could digest them. And Little Black moved like this. It was like a fuse, as if a fire had been lit in the forest. He saw several kinds of demonic plants that Han Fei had paid special attention to just now. For example, the big pure blue flower. Every circle of its patterns was pulled from the flower like a sweater thread. When he looked again, the blobs on the patterns moved and opened their eyes. Isn't that a worm? It was the first time that Han Fei had seen a ring-shaped worm. And the dark green feather-like plant, which looked like a peacock spreading its tail. As a matter of fact, every single hair on the feather fell off and surged at Han Fei. And the red flower with white stamens. That was not a squid at all. It was simply a round leaf with a bunch of worms wrapped in it. Han Fei was dumbfounded. He remembered the place he came from. Wasn't it a worm cave? Oh my God, now he was in a real worm cave. As far as he could see, all he could see were worms. The point was that they could perfectly turn into the form of plants. When Han Fei was shocked by this scene, he saw the calabash on his head suddenly explode. Yes, it exploded for no reason. But if it exploded, then so be it. What was up with the millions of bugs that shot out? Wasn't this purely disgusting? Ew, what was the difference between Han Fei and the ghost aphis worms just now? With a thought, Han Fei fused Little Black and Little White. The infinity water turned into a rotating storm, crushing countless worms and bursting into a rain of sticky, disgusting liquid. More importantly, this liquid was highly toxic. The array that Han Fei stepped on was corroded dozens of layers in just 2 seconds. Han Fei could see several kinds of worms with a casual glance. For example, named exploding worm. Introduction: this is a kind of worm that will only be conceived in the fetus and will never take the initiative to come out. The fetus nourishes these exploding worms by absorbing the spiritual energy from the outside world. Once the fetus explodes, all the exploding worms will be ejected and explode within 10 seconds. Its liquid is super corrosive. If you stay in the liquid of the exploding worms for a long time, even your body will be corroded. Level 29 Quality Rare Realm, Spirit Guarding Realm, Spiritual Energy greater than 481 points, Combat Skills, none, Collectibles, none, Unabsorbable. Chapter 1995. At this moment, the exploding worms had almost surrounded Han Fei. Countless worms piled up like a mountain, pressing Han Fei to the bottom of the mountain. Moreover, this was not the only gourd that exploded. 2 other gourds that were close to it had also exploded. That was like a tide of worms, similar to the ghost aphis worms. But the problem was that the ghost aphis worms were undead creatures, while the exploding worms were living creatures. Another piece of information appeared in Han Fei's eyes. Named 10,000 rotations leaf worms. Introduction: as a kind of worm born as grass, The 10,000 rotations leafworm strength is judged by how long it lives. The longer it lives, the more resilient it is and the stronger its binding ability is. The 10,000 rotations leafworm can turn into soul-binding threads, entangling and blinding the souls of others. Level 39 Quality Rare Realm Awakened contains Spiritual Energy 1, 248 Battle Technique, Binding, Collectible, None, Unabsorbable. When Han Fei saw the insect roll towards him, it suddenly disappeared when it was right in front of him. He was still wondering what was going on, but it turned out that it could actually turn into invisible threads to bind his soul. Explode! Without hesitation, Han Fei detonated the infinity water. He was so decisive because he didn't know how big this forest was. Of course, he could run away with a single leap, but what about after that? If the environment he encountered was the same, would he continue to aimlessly leap with golden light? Instead of doing that, he might as well detonate the infinity water. With the current power of the infinity water, even the exploding worm and the myriad wheel leaf worm within 50,000 kilometers would be vaporized directly, as it was impossible for them to survive. Rumble, Han Fei didn't care whether this place was an imperial palace or not. If he kept fighting these things, he wouldn't be able to absorb as much spiritual energy as they did. Unless he used the resources in the Origin Sea. If it was an ordinary half-step monarch, they might have already fallen for it. After all, if an ocean of exploding worms corroded them at the same time, the speed at which they absorbed resources might not be able to keep up with the speed at which they corroded them. As if a nuclear bomb had exploded, countless woodlands around him were flattened to the ground at Han Fei's naked eyes. As Han Fei waved his hand, the infinity water quickly returned to him. Han Fei didn't use it again but directly extracted the water vapor here to prepare for the recovery of the infinity water. In addition, Han Fei had already begun to accumulate spiritual energy. If this place was large enough, the infinity water wouldn't be able to destroy it. When the aftermath of the explosion died down, Han Fei was unscathed. He looked around the room again. He was surprised to find that the explosion of the infinity water did not shake this space at all. Apart from this place was filled with poisonous gas, perhaps because he had destroyed too many creatures. Most of the bugs and poisons had already completely dissipated, but there were still some poisons that could not be evaporated by the explosion and were still intertwining in the air. As a result, in Han Fei's mind, the 9 poisons treasure silkworm kept devouring, and Han Fei's body was also spontaneously absorbing and adapting to these poisons. Combining with Little Black and Little White, Han Fei tried to perceive the surroundings with Little White's ability, but the result was the same as in the Mist Sea. There was no chance at all. Little White was also restricted. In this case, Han Fei still put away Little Black and Little White, set up the soul-driving array for himself, grabbed a bottle of detoxification pills, and swallowed dozens of them. He didn't want the 9 poisons treasure silkworm to fall asleep, nor did he want to be poison-resistant to the limit. Han Fei leaped up, and with a flash of golden light, he flew more than 50,000 kilometers in that direction. As soon as he appeared, some dilapidated woodlands immediately appeared, but most of them had been scorched. What a large insect cave! 50,000 kilometers in length and width is still not enough? When Han Fei wandered along the entire explosion range, halfway through he found that from the unknown forest, a tide of bugs was surging towards the open space that had just been exploded. Holy shit, Han Fei was dumbfounded. There are still so many of them? Even if the infinity water exploded again, it wouldn't be able to kill them all. The explosion of the infinity water only proved that there were too many bugs here and it was impossible to kill them all. At this time, Han Fei certainly wouldn't be stupid enough to kill the bugs. He knew that no matter what, he couldn't stay here. Otherwise, it wouldn't take long for the bug tide to cover the entire place, forming a vast ocean of bugs. Han Fei found that he only had 2 choices now. One was to fight in the bug tide and find a way. Han Fei could do this himself. However, Han Fei remembered what Han Xian said. Generally speaking, the things in the Imperial Palace were not meaningless. In such a large sea of bugs, were there treasures in it? If there were no treasures, then why did they break in? To fight with the bug tide? Courting death? In the Imperial Palace, countless people had obtained opportunities from it, indicating that it was very likely to be a test. For example, a strong master wanted to accept a disciple and pass on his skills. If it was the second case, then there must be something waiting for him in this bug-tide forest. The bug-tide might be a test to make him panic. However, the strength of the bug-tide here was not very strong, which meant that although there were hundreds of millions of bugs here, the ones who came were at least in the venerable realm. If he was lucky, there was still a glimmer of hope for survival. However, because Han Fei was the first to come here, he simply turned a multiplayer mode that should be explored by countless people into a single-player mode. Of course, the degree of difficulty soared. Han Fei quickly made up his mind at this moment. God knew how many bugs there were here. But at least these bugs couldn't hurt him. Even if he continued to explode the infinity water, he could still kill countless bugs. Therefore, Han Fei didn't care where the way out of this bug-tide forest was at all. He held the nautical panorama and used the third pointing ability without hesitation. When the nautical panorama started, Han Fei leaped and flashed tens of thousands of kilometers away. Sure enough, as soon as Han Fei appeared, there was really a surging bug tide around him. Worms, beetles, nematodes, thousand-lun leafworms, and many bugs that Han Fei passed by without even looking at their information were almost about to crush Han Fei's face. The halo of time appeared, and everything that came into contact with it was annihilated. But Han Fei only stayed for a very short time. As soon as the bugs within hundreds of meters withered, Han Fei had disappeared. The nautical panorama only had 6 to 8 seconds, and this was because the destination was certain. If the destination was not certain, or was not within this space, the sea-shaking panorama would only point once. When Han Fei saw the nautical panorama move, he knew that there must be a treasure guarded by thousands of bugs hidden in this so-called bug-tide forest. Because of the reaction time of the nautical panorama, Han Fei had to pause every time he appeared to let the nautical panorama repoint the direction. Therefore, Han Fei could barely maintain the frequency of 2 leaps per second. After 6 seconds in a row, Han Fei should not be far from the place pointed by the nautical panorama. When Han Fei appeared again, suddenly, Han Fei found that the surrounding field of vision was wide. And when he took a closer look, he found that there was not even a bug where he was. Looking around, Han Fei found that more than 20 kilometers behind him was the place where the bug tide was surging. Did I enter the barrier? Han Fei's first thought was that he had found the key place. Because this was a place guarded by the bugs, there were no bugs. Han Fei walked toward the inside of the barrier. After walking more than 300 kilometers, right in front of Han Fei, at the end of his sight, a place that looked like an altar appeared. However, the thing placed on the altar was very strange. It looked like a bronze mirror that had been polished to the point where it could be seen down to the finest detail. And under the altar stood a man in black with 2 scimitars in his hands and half of his face covered. When he saw this person, Han Fei was shocked. He knew that the real test had come. The bug tide was not necessarily the key, but this person and the mirror behind him were the root of the problem. Han Fei took a step and was only 10 kilometers away from that person, and that person seemed to feel that someone was coming and slowly raised his head. Han Fei narrowed his eyes. Since this was the most suitable place for him, there must be a reason. There was no energy flow in this person's body at all, but the sense of threat he posed to Han Fei was not weak, not particularly strong, but definitely not weak in the Pioneer Sea realm. Han Fei asked, "Is it a human or an insect? Can it talk?" Because all he saw were insects, Han Fei naturally had a bold guess. After all, the Bug King was also an insect, and it could also transform into a human. However, the man did not respond but slowly pulled up his scimitars. With a swoosh, Han Fei saw 2 wisps of smoke appear in front of him. Subconsciously, the embroidery needle in front of Han Fei stood up and fixed on the ground like a sea-calming needle. Clang, the crisp sound was the collision of weapons, which shook out a layer of ripples and wanted to spread out. Chapter 1996. Taking a closer look, Han Fei found no data in his eyes, which meant that this person was not an insect. However, this person's appearance was very weird. He seemed to be tattooed all over his body, which should be some kind of spell engraved on his body. Especially on his face, there was almost no normal skin. It was full of dark green spells. Han Fei blocked the power of the double knives and immediately launched the void lines, intending to control this person with the void lines. And the opponent's double knives circled the embroidery needles and slashed at Han Fei. The two of them chose different ways of attack, and to Han Fei's shock, the void lines didn't work at all, which meant that this person might not even have a broken soul. Almost at the same time, blue light flowed around Han Fei's upper body, and the two terrifying knife lights cut directly into time and space but didn't touch Han Fei's head. After this blow, Han Fei withdrew the void lines, and the opponent turned into a cloud of black smoke and retreated. In the first confrontation, no one gained any advantage. Since the opponent didn't even have a residual soul, he was like a puppet. But this kind of character was not afraid of life and death, had no emotions, and his fighting style continued the fighting style of the original body, which was also extremely powerful. Han Fei quickly judged the opponent's strength. Judging from the power shown by this blow, the opponent's power was less than 200,000 waves. However, this person was fast, could turn into smoke, and had a unique way of using the double knives. That was all Han Fei could see from this blow. The two separated as soon as they collided, but then the strange man seemed to feel Han Fei's strength. He clasped one hand and made a strange seal, and then a tide of insects drilled out of the ground. Originally, there were no insects in this area, and Han Fei thought it was because of the special environment here. But now it seemed that this was not the case. This person could control insects, and the reason why he didn't let the insects enter this area was probably to protect the bronze mirror on the altar. At this moment, Han Fei was an intruder, and he was not weak, so he used the means of controlling insects. So, this person's main ability was to control insects? Although Han Fei didn't want to deal with a lot of insects, it didn't mean that he was really afraid of them. In addition to detonating the infinity water, Han Fei had many means. Han Fei stretched out his hand and clawed out a crack in the void. He didn't want to use this space crack to fight, so he crushed it in the next moment. Everything within a radius of dozens of meters exploded, and the void turbulence wreaked havoc. As Han Fei opened his hands, the infinity water continued to turn into blades and cut the storm bigger and bigger. Han Fei grinned. It's a pity that your insects are too low level. If they could grow to the level of law enforcer, I wouldn't have killed them in such a simple way. Buzz, however, the strange man clasped his hands together, and the countless insects that were swarming toward him intertwined with each other, turning into hundreds and thousands of humanoid figures. And his appearance was very similar to the weirdo in front of Han Fei. You can play this way? Han Fei couldn't help but be surprised. The strength of these interweaving insects soared after they turned into human beings. In the blink of an eye, thousands of explorers had appeared here, and they were still trying to fuse with each other. Han Fei's heart sank. If he continued to cultivate like this, wouldn't he soon reach the Venerable Realm? Buzz, Han Fei directly projected a sea expansion realm clone, and the clone even drew a knife in the void at will. Bam, bam, bam. In the blink of an eye, dozens of explorers were chopped into pieces. But at the moment when these explorers were chopped into pieces, a large amount of corrosive liquid drifted in the void and flowed towards the pile of insects. Han Fei realized that behind the pile of insects, perhaps a powerful insect man was being born. Han Fei knew that he must not give this weirdo a chance. Otherwise, with so many insects fusing with each other, it was not impossible to create another sea expansion realm master. Therefore, Han Fei immediately took action, trying to take the initiative to find and kill the strong master in the pile of insects behind. However, the weirdo in front of him seemed to have burst out with all his strength, turning into a black smoke and wrapping himself in it. And in the black smoke, thousands of knives slashed down at Han Fei in the blink of an eye. The speed was so fast that Han Fei felt it was Xia Shaochan who was attacking. However, it was precisely because Han Fei and Xia Shaochan had fought too many times that he was very used to this kind of explosive power. Besides, this person didn't even have a soul. How could he block Han Fei's Tao of Time? Unknowingly, a blue screen of light had appeared within the black fog. At the moment this light curtain appeared, Han Fei could clearly see that in this black smoke, there was a black shadow holding two knives and slashing crazily. Clang, 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 like an iron wall, Han Fei was slashed hundreds of times in an instant, but he also took advantage of the time when he was slashed hundreds of times to directly lock onto the black shadow, and with a flip of his hand, he launched the immortal fierce chi. In the face of such an enemy who could control billions of insects, if Han Fei dared to be careless, when the insects really fused with each other and turned into a super strong master, it would be even more difficult to fight at that time. The weirdo tried to avoid the immortal fierce chi, but being slowed down by time, he knew he could only take it head-on. Crack, crack, crack around this person, 7 void cracks appeared, and a huge number of Hercules insects crawled out of them. The power of the immortal fierce chi was naturally terrifying. However, this space was suddenly filled with Hercules insects, and colorful longhorn beetles also appeared. With just one attack, hundreds of thousands of Hercules insects and longhorn beetles were turned into powder. The weirdo was retreating quickly, and a few tens of millions of insects in front of him stood in front of him, in order to take Han Fei's blow. Humph! Han Fei ran the great path completely, turned into a golden light, and jumped in front of the weirdo. He poked with 2 fingers, and the great path becomes one sword stabbed at the weirdo. The weirdo was still expressionless, even though he was about to be crushed by Han Fei. The 2 knives in his hands were thrown away, and 2 swallows Huishen slashed back, and the spell patterns on his arms flickered, and the 2 hands turned into 2 supergiant insects that were 100 meters long, like bobbit insects. From a distance, they even looked like 2 dragons coming out of the sea. However, how could this block Han Fei's great path becomes one sword? The 2 fat insect arms exploded in an instant, and then his body was shattered by Han Fei's sword. As for the swallows Huishen, Han Fei hit them with the yin-yang reincarnation knife backhand and sent them flying with one blow. But Han Fei's face didn't look good, because the weirdo actually molted like an insect in front of him when he was almost dead. Also at this moment, the black smoke gathered, and the weirdo appeared, but beside him, an identical figure appeared, which should be a fusion of insects. Then, Han Fei saw an extremely disgusting scene. The monstrous man's mouth suddenly opened wide and he swallowed the sea expansion insect in one gulp. This is really a fucking insect man, Han Fei was shocked. After the weirdo ate the insect man, his strength soared dramatically. As he stretched out his hand and waved, the 2 scimitars returned. When he looked at Han Fei again, Han Fei's heart sank. This sea of insects was completely his territory, and he could have as many clones as he wanted. If he could keep eating like this, how much could he eat? At this moment, the ripples in the void were endless, and the sea of insects was destroyed one after another. The immortal baleful immortal was still blocked by those beetles. Although he advanced again, he couldn't get close. Han Fei took a deep breath. In this case, let's decide the winner. Just when Han Fei was about to make a big move, he suddenly heard the old turtle say, "Wait a minute, that mirror seems to be shining on you." The old turtle's words made Han Fei's hair stand on end. Is that mirror shining on me? When Han Fei looked back, he saw that the mirror was already facing in his direction. Am I being targeted by something? Suddenly, Han Fei's heart sank and he didn't continue to reveal his trump card. If there was really something staring at him all the time, now was the most unwise time to reveal his trump card. At this moment, the insect man continued to attack, and it was completely different from the person just now. This person's speed was faster and his explosive power was stronger, and his strength had reached more than 300,000 waves. Of course, although he was still not Han Fei's opponent, if he swallowed an insect man later, God knew how strong it would become. Therefore, Han Fei knew that this had to be a quick battle. At this moment, the fierce immortal had just rushed out and cut off its shell, but the power of the yin-yang reincarnation knife was still there. Han Fei couldn't help but look at the sea of insects where the fierce immortal was, and with a thought, the infinity water exploded again. Rumble, the terrifying ripples blew up hundreds of millions of insects here into nothingness, and the fierce immortal broke free from the sea of insects. The person seemed to know what Han Fei was thinking and intended to retreat to the sea of insects. But Han Fei took out the embroidery needle and directly rushed to the altar, regardless of whether the person stayed or left. Seeing this, the insect man saw that Han Fei didn't care about it at all, and all the spells on its body immediately lit up. Its speed soared to the extreme. With a swish, it blocked in front of Han Fei. But Han Fei had already expected this scene, and the embroidery needle in his hand was already ready. With a heaven-buckling gait, the insect man exploded. How could Han Fei feel at ease if the insect man didn't die? Just when the insect man turned into smoke, before the body in the smoke had time to escape, the fierce immortal slashed at him and the yin-yang reincarnation knife arrived. Puff! At this point, the insect tide stopped, and the insect man was finally annihilated under Han Fei's attack. Chapter 1997. Phew! Han Fei let out a long sigh of relief. This sea of insects was extremely difficult. Not to mention whether this insect man was powerful or not, it was not easy to find this altar. Han Fei didn't dare to think about it. If he didn't have the multisensory instrument, it would take him at least a few days to find this place. During this period, he was devouring poisonous gas almost all the time and suffering the corrosion of the corrosive insect fluid. Furthermore, they had to endure the corrosion of the corrosive insect fluid. If any other king came, even if they could barely reach the altar, they would first be half dead. At that time, if he fought with this insect man again, he would be ranked in the top 30 of the ocean expansion realm. However, after devouring this insect clone, his strength soared to about the top 10. Fortunately, he reacted quickly and killed this guy early. Otherwise, if he devoured this insect man's clone, he would probably be ranked in the top 3 of the ocean expansion realm. At that time, it would be even more difficult to defeat him. Han Fei was speechless. The beginning was so difficult just for a mirror? What the hell was this mirror? At this moment, the insect man was annihilated, and Han Fei felt that he should have obtained the first treasure of this trip, a mirror. In a place like the altar, Han Fei was very careful when he walked up. The altar was trapezoidal and had a total of 99 steps. In the middle of the steps, there was a river left by a waterfall-like river. Of course, the river was almost dry now. Occasionally, a drop of water could be seen falling from it. When Han Fei came to the bottom of the steps, he was surprised to find that there was a pool under the river. What flowed in this river turned out to be the essence of the earth vein, and it had even accumulated into a pond more than 10 meters wide under the altar. How could Han Fei let it go? The essence of the earth vein was very rare. He once robbed about 30,000 kilograms of it under the earth vein in the Forest of Terror. At that time, Xue Fan should have gotten at least 1,000,000 kilograms, which was how he built the Blood Sea Divine Wood City, a force full of big red trunks. However, at that time, the scope of Xue Fan's layout was 300,000 kilometers, and the essence of the earth vein was used to form the pattern of the earth vein, so it might not be enough. But now Han Fei estimated that this pool was at least 1,000,000 kilograms. Gulp. Han Fei couldn't help but swallow his saliva and couldn't help sighing. No wonder countless people are desperately trying to break into the Imperial Palace. Just this is enough to completely transform a sea expansion expert's earth vein. No matter how poor their earth vein is, with the help of this low-priced essence, its quality will rise to a whole new level. The old tortoise also exclaimed, as expected of the Imperial Palace, "This is too extravagant." I'm afraid the entire bug race forest relies on the endless supply of earth vein essence. Reminded by the old turtle, Han Fei suddenly realized something. Yes, this insectide forest was very large, and the essence of the earth vein had created a perfect living environment for them. Therefore, there were so many bugs here that it could drive people crazy. However, Han Fei didn't care about those bugs at this moment. He used the water control technique to absorb a large amount of earth vein essence and stuff it directly into the origin sea. As for how to make arrangements in the future, that was a matter for later. He had to stuff the earth vein essence into the origin sea first. When Han Fei almost dug out all the soil here, Han Fei estimated that there was a total of 12 million kilograms of earth vein essence. This was understandable because the earth vein essence belonged to the entire earth vein and couldn't be stored here all the time. Therefore, the amount of earth vein essence accumulated in this small pool should be the accumulation of thousands of years here. But at this time, Han Fei saw a drop of earth vein essence flowing down from the altar. Han Fei reached out to grab it and stuffed it into his mouth. Although it was something used to shape earth veins, it was extremely nourishing for the soul. Unfortunately, Han Fei didn't have time to wait here. This was the first place he came to after entering the Imperial Palace, and he had already obtained so much earth vein essence. It was hard to imagine what treasures there would be later. After collecting this earth vein essence, Han Fei felt that even if he opened up a origin sea of 100,000 kilometers, this earth vein essence would be enough. Therefore, Han Fei didn't feel that the danger at the entrance and in the insect-tied forest was very dangerous. After all, it was not beyond his ability. He could also go through the entrance of the black vortex. Therefore, Han Fei directly stepped on the first step in one go. Finding nothing unusual, Han Fei still went up one step and waited. Following Han Xian's warning, he didn't advance rashly. Until the last step, Han Fei didn't encounter any trouble, and in the end, he directly reached the top. Han Fei breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that not all the altars were mysterious. When Han Fei climbed to the last floor and looked at the bronze mirror, a strange light flashed in his eyes. However, the bronze mirror suddenly faded, and the surrounding world, like a dreamy space, kept changing. The insect-tied forest disappeared. Immediately afterward, Han Fei's eyes lit up. Above his head, there was a flawless mirror, and under his feet, there was also a flawless mirror. Around him, one mirror after another appeared with a swish, and in the mirror, there was one after another of himself. Clatter! Han Fei was dumbfounded. He should have guessed it. How could an altar set up in the Imperial Palace be a joke? He didn't even have time to take a good look at the bronze mirror. He didn't even have time to see the demon purification pot, and he appeared in this world full of mirrors. Fuck, Han Fei's surprised expression was clearly reflected in the mirror. Because there were mirrors everywhere, Han Fei could see himself from different angles no matter which angle he looked at himself. Gulp. Han Fei swallowed. In all the mirrors he saw, he was swallowing saliva. Han Fei even felt that the person in the mirror seemed to be standing outside. Hey, 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 Han Fei just shouted, but this, hey, came from all the mirrors in all directions lingering. Hiss, Han Fei's eyes widened. What the hell is this? Why were the reflections in the mirrors able to shout out? Han Fei told himself that there must be a secret here. Since there must be answers or things he needed to find here, he had to try to break this space. Han Fei waved casually and slashed at one of the mirrors, trying to destroy the mirror and see what mysteries there were in this world. However, when Han Fei slashed out casually, he suddenly had a headache because he saw countless knife lights coming out of the mirror, breaking the mirror, and rushing at him. Son of a bitch! Han Fei didn't dare to hesitate. Although he didn't understand what was going on, he immediately punched to block. In an instant, the sky was full of fist shadows, blasting at the knife lights in all directions. But the next scene made Han Fei's back break out in a cold sweat. The sky full of fist shadows also bombarded out of the mirror. For a moment, all he could see were knife lights and fist shadows. Fuck! Han Fei's current strength was no longer weak. Although he had only used 30% of his strength in that casual strike, with countless 30% stacking on top of each other, it wouldn't be easy for him to withstand it. At this moment, Han Fei had two choices. One was to resist the knife lights and fist shadows, and the other was to reverse time and go back to the moment just now. Han Fei decisively chose to reverse time. After consuming a small amount of chaotic gas, Han Fei successfully returned to the original state. Seeing that there was no ripple in the space, he let out a long sigh of relief. And his reflection in the mirror naturally also breathed a sigh of relief. Han Fei couldn't help but curse. Why are you so angry? I'm the one being beaten. Why are you so angry? I'm the one being beaten. Why are you so angry? I'm the one being beaten, you. For a moment, the whole space was filled with this voice. Han Fei shut up, thinking, "Can I just stop talking?" Han Fei suspected that he had to pass such a trial in order to get the bronze mirror. What would be the consequences if he didn't pass this trial? But then Han Fei suddenly thought of something. Can I reverse time and go back to a moment ago? This should be a way to pass the trial, right? Han Fei was overjoyed. He immediately summoned the chaotic gas, and a blue halo flowed on his body, trying to reverse time and go back to the time before he fell into this space. However, after consuming 10 strands of chaotic gas in a row, Han Fei found that he didn't move at all. Hiss, how is it possible? I can clearly reverse time just now, so theoretically, the Tao of time shouldn't be blocked in this space. Why can't I get out? This was the first time that Han Fei had encountered a situation where he couldn't reverse time. Han Fei immediately wanted to tear the void and jump into the river of time with the golden light. However, the void here couldn't be torn at all, as if he were in a void and couldn't be opened. Motherfucker, he's trapped. Chapter 1998. Fuck, I knew the Imperial Palace was dangerous, but I didn't expect it to be so dangerous. How long has it been? I've already encountered a trap of this level? Han Fei's heart sank. The difficulty of the Imperial Palace was far beyond his imagination. He thought it would be difficult, but he didn't expect it to be so difficult at the beginning. It had been opened for 3 years, and this was only the first day he came in. And this is what you gave me? If it were another king, he might have been killed by now. However, it was useless to complain here now. In this world full of mirrors, the only thing he could do was not to fight. Once he fought, he would be fighting himself. Fortunately, he could reverse time here. Otherwise, he would have been beaten up by a group of people just now. Who would believe it? Now, Han Fei's biggest headache was looking at these mirrors, because when he looked at any mirror, there was not only one person in the mirror, but countless copies of himself. Because a mirror reflected all the scenes it could reflect. The same was true of the mirrors in the mirrors. As a result, wherever Han Fei looked, he saw countless mirrors and countless copies of himself. Fortunately, he had the Gemini Divine technique. Han Fei was sure that he couldn't get out in a short time. The first thing he thought of was the Gemini Divine technique. Pure darkness could even absorb light, so when Han Fei appeared in the black mist, he looked at the mirror again, but there was nothing in it. Phew! Han Fei secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he had many means, otherwise he really didn't know what to do. The white mist was still standing in place, not moving, mainly because he was too lazy to move. Because as soon as he moved, all the copies of himself in the mirror moved with him. This feeling was very weird. Han Fei left the place where he was in the black mist. He didn't look for a way first, but looked at the mirror first. Han Fei walked around one of the mirrors and found that it was a tetrahedron. That was to say, this was a tetrahedron. On the back, left and right of the mirror, there were also mirrors, even above his head and under his feet. Countless mirrors overlapped here. To tell the truth, even though Han Fei was already half a king, it was difficult for him to distinguish the real from the fake, because this mirror had no obvious frame at all. Since the body of black fog couldn't be reflected in the mirror at all, it shouldn't be a problem to destroy it, right? This time, Han Fei only used less than 10% of his strength, so even if there would still be an invisible counterattack, he could easily withstand it with his body alone. However, when Han Fei slapped the mirror, his expression immediately changed. It was as if he had slapped a divine artifact. He couldn't even shake it. Instead, a huge force was generated, causing ripples to appear in the air. Although the mirror could not be shaken, the crazy attacks from all directions did not appear. Therefore, this mirror could only refract power, but it couldn't refract things that it couldn't refract. Han Fei grinned. It's quite hard, huh? Han Fei went up and hammered the mirror with his strongest blow. With the power of the Black Fog Avatar, if Han Fei exerted his full strength, it would be 200,000 waves. However, the Venerable One mirror did not budge at all. Instead, the energy ripples in the void reacted and were actually refracted. Buzz, swish, swish, swish. All of a sudden, countless energy ripples surged. Han Fei had a bad feeling and shouted in a low voice, "Gemini fusion." After Gemini fusion, the first thing Han Fei did was to use the time reversal technique. Otherwise, when all the ripples vibrated, he would be hit by the shock waves caused by the body of Black Fog's full strength, which was even more terrifying than Han Fei's previous punches and knives. When the time was reversed, Han Fei breathed a sigh of relief again. This time, he didn't plan to make a move. He finally realized that this place was not a place that could be broken by force at all. It seemed that in this space, this mirror was invincible and could not be broken by humans at all. Using the Gemini divine technique again, Han Fei's body of black fog groped his way out. He was trying to find a way out. Because there were mirror images everywhere, it was really a little difficult to distinguish the route. Anyway, after groping for a long time, not only did Han Fei not find the way, but he couldn't even find the way back. Everywhere he looked was empty. He had bumped into the mirror hundreds of times. Fortunately, he got used to bumping into it. Han Fei also learned to be smart. The body of black fog directly turned into a black fog and walked around the mirror. Finally, on the next day, Han Fei's attempt to find the body of white fog failed. However, a failure was a failure. Now the two were closely connected and they just needed to know each other's existence. If it didn't work, he would use Gemini fusion and be together. Han Fei naturally wouldn't be very nervous. Han Fei was sure that a day had passed, so he immediately took out the nautical panorama, and with a thought, he wanted the nautical panorama to find a way out for him. As a result, the nautical panorama began to spin crazily, but the pointer was moving in a circular motion. Soon, it pointed to the place it could point to, as if it had malfunctioned. Han Fei thought to himself, so, the way out is actually inside the mirror? Han Fei was sure that the nautical panorama wouldn't be affected by the mirror and couldn't choose a direction, so when it moved, it meant that it knew how to get out, and the way was inside the mirror. Han Fei thought to himself that this was nonsense. He could probably guess that he had fallen into the world of the bronze mirror. If he wanted to get out, he could only get out through the mirror. But the problem was, how could he get out? Therefore, Han Fei's second point was to silently say, "Point to the treasure or secret place here." But the result was the same as before. He still didn't know the correct direction and spun randomly. "Huh." The old turtle said, "Well, why do I have a feeling? Are you sure that this is your original body?" Hearing this, Han Fei's heart skipped a beat and he couldn't help but respond, "What do you mean?" The old turtle said, "There are countless mirrors here, and the you in the mirror can attack you physically. So, is the you in the mirror real or fake?" Han Fei's eyes widened. The idea put forward by the old turtle was too terrifying. If what the old turtle said was true, then it was really hard to say whether he was himself or not. But Han Fei thought for a while. If he could find the body of white mist instead of in the mirror, did it mean that he was real? With a thought in his mind, the nautical panorama had already turned. Hey, I didn't ask you to turn. Han Fei just made a mistake and had this idea. However, he didn't know where he had gone. Although he wasn't far away from the body of white fog, he still couldn't sense the presence of the white fog. Although he was not far from the body of white mist, under the illumination of so many mirrors, it would be really difficult for him to find the body of white mist in just a few seconds. Besides, to see if he was real, he could just ask the nautical panorama to point at him. Unfortunately, the 3 chances today had been used up in this short period of time, so Han Fei had no other choice. Immediately, he went back with Gemini as one. The third day. As soon as the time passed, Han Fei took out the nautical panorama. This time, Han Fei took it out directly. He thought to himself, if the me in the mirror is real, is their nautical panorama also real? Then Han Fei asked, "Where is my real body?" But this time, something creepy happened. The nautical panorama continued to spin randomly and it seemed that his real body could be seen everywhere. Son of a bitch! Han Fei couldn't help cursing secretly. Is the nautical panorama broken? What the hell is going on? If all the people in the mirror are my real body, then what am I? But Han Fei didn't panic. He immediately asked again, "Where is my only real body?" However, the result was still the same. It seemed that all the people here were his only real body. Suddenly, Han Fei activated the Gemini Divine technique again. Han Fei asked where his body of black mist was, and the result was the same. The nautical panorama was still spinning randomly. Now even Han Fei himself began to doubt whether he was real or not. This space made him doubt himself. Plop! Han Fei sat on the ground and leaned his back against the mirror. The body of black mist and the body of white mist were facing each other. The body of black mist looked at the body of white mist and was speechless. If he took it out to fight, it would be so scary that the enemy wouldn't know where his real body was, because even he didn't know where his real body was. And the body of white mist and the body of black mist were both aimlessly glancing at the mirrors around them, looking at themselves in the mirror, and themselves in the mirror were also looking at themselves. Huh! But suddenly, the body of black mist and the body of white mist exclaimed almost at the same time. At that moment, Han Fei couldn't help but think of his jasper stone bridge. He remembered standing on the top of the bridge and looking down at the bridge. At that time, he was also looking at another version of himself that didn't really exist. For some reason, this feeling suddenly appeared just now. Is this mirror space related to the Great Way? Chapter 1999. When Han Fei saw so many of himself looking at him, he inexplicably thought of the scene when he looked at himself on the Jade Bridge and under the bridge. At that moment, Han Fei was even confused for a moment. Gemini as one. Han Fei no longer used the Gemini Divine technique. He suddenly felt that since the navigator let him come in through this entrance, it meant that this was the most suitable place for him. What was the most suitable? Just at that moment, Han Fei felt that this world was very suitable for his great path. However, what was his great path? It was a fundamentally unknown great path that even he hadn't figured out yet. As if thinking of something, Han Fei closed his eyes and meditated. Another day passed. One day later, Han Fei asked the first question, "Is there anyone else in this space besides myself?" This time, the navigator didn't move, which meant that there was no one else here, and the navigator didn't go out of control. Han Fei immediately asked the second question, "In this space, is there any inhuman power watching me?" The nautical panorama did not move, which meant that the mirror dimension was a completely enclosed trap-like space. After asking the second question, Han Fei summoned a jade bridge in front of him with a thought. Of course, in the mirror, there were also countless jade bridges. But Han Fei ignored it and climbed to the top of the bridge in one breath. When Han Fei stepped on the bridge, he could no longer see the outside world. In the other mirrors, Han Fei's figure disappeared, and in the mirror space, there was only a jade stone bridge left. Han Fei stood on the bridge, looking at the figure under the bridge. Han Fei had tried this no less than thousands of times, but he couldn't understand it. He didn't understand what this great path was at all. But this time, Han Fei murmured, "Fake is real, and fake is real. I am real and so are you. I am fake and so are you. So, in fact, there is no such thing as the present me or the future me. They are all me." Han Fei was curious. Behind the figure under the bridge was a hazy mist. He had always obtained the power of the Great Way when he reached the foot of the bridge. If he wanted to go forward, he couldn't go any further, so he had to come out. But today, a strange thought crossed his mind. He suddenly turned his head around and leaned on the bridge. He looked down the bridge instead of down the steps. In the past, the entire bridge was shrouded in white mist, and the Jasper Stone Bridge had yet to reveal its true appearance. When the entire Jade Bridge appeared, Han Fei thought that he had seen the whole Jade Bridge, but did he really see it? The existence of the mirror space made Han Fei realize that what he thought was real might not necessarily be real. Maybe his reflection in the mirror also thought that he was real. Just like you in the mirror, it's the opposite. Was it necessary to use a mirror in order to have the opposite idea? Sure enough, when Han Fei looked down the Jasper Stone Bridge, he saw that there was a reflection under the bridge, as if the bridge should be standing in the water. And under the water, there was also a Jasper Stone Bridge, and the bridge opening and the reflection of the bridge looked like a circle. So, Han Fei wondered if he was really alone on the Jasper Stone Bridge. Because there was also a reflection of himself under the bridge. Han Fei immediately looked back in the direction he came from. This was something that Han Fei had never thought of before, because he came up from below. However, when he looked in the direction he came from, he found that there was also a reflection of himself standing under the bridge. Fuck! Han Fei felt creeped out. Sure enough, this mirror space gave him an inspiration and made him realize that he was in his own way. He thought he was in his own body, but in fact, perhaps in the eyes of his reflection, he was the vague figure standing here without moving. Gulp. Han Fei swallowed. How? Han Fei's forehead was sweating. He had never seen such a weird great way. It was like the Jasper Stone Bridge was rotating. When he went up the bridge, his reflection was actually going down the bridge. When he went down the bridge, his reflection was actually going up the bridge. If he looked at it the other way around, then when he walked down the Jasper Stone Bridge, was he really going down the stairs, or was he going up the stairs? If he was going down the stairs, why did he have to bear so much pressure? If he was going up the stairs, was he real or fake? Didn't it mean that he was going up the stairs, but he was actually going down the stairs, and he thought he was going up the stairs, but he was actually going down the stairs? So, Han Fei finally analyzed an extremely terrifying fact. Perhaps he had always been a reflection in the Great Way. This horrified Han Fei. If he had always been a reflection, why did he feel that he was the real person? No, Han Fei shook his head repeatedly. I am me, and I am the real person. There is no such thing as a reflection. Because even if I am a reflection, the other me on the opposite side will also bear the pressure when going up the stairs, so he won't feel that he is a reflection, right? Han Fei took a deep breath. What if he changed his way of thinking? For example, in his yin-yang great way, he was actually one yin and one yang, two Taoist bodies. Then when he went down the stairs, in fact, two of him were walking to the same end, just like the combination of yin and yang, the yin-yang great way. Of course, his strength would be doubled. So, after he went down the stairs, his strength increased threefold. Was it because of this reason? As Han Fei thought of this, suddenly, Han Fei felt that the bridge began to tremble slightly. Han Fei felt that his yin-yang great way was collapsing. What's going on? Han Fei hurriedly went down the stairs. Because he was worried about the yin-yang great way, Han Fei didn't notice that when he went down the stairs, he was much more relaxed. When Han Fei went down the stairs, he immediately switched to the yin-yang great way among the three great ways. However, at this time, the yin-yang great way began to collapse in Han Fei's eyes. But this collapse was not a complete collapse. The yin-yang great way turned into two mists, one black and one white. One disappeared into the Jasper Stone Bridge, and the other into the projection of the Jasper Stone Bridge. Han Fei was suddenly repelled by the Jasper Stone Bridge. When he came back to his senses, he was already standing in this mirror space. Although Han Fei wanted to continue to see the subsequent changes of the Jasper Stone Bridge, something that made Han Fei extremely excited appeared at this moment. He just ran the Great Way, and at this moment, he felt that his strength had increased threefold. Han Fei was so excited that his breathing became rapid, which made Han Fei couldn't help but grin. His understanding of the Great Way deepened, and when he ran the Great Way, the effect returned to threefold. How could Han Fei not be excited? Originally, although his strength had been skyrocketing, when his strength was 200,000 waves, he could barely erupt with the power of 500,000 waves. When his strength was 250,000 waves, the power of the Great Way was only a little more than 500,000 waves. When his current strength was 290,000 waves and approaching 300,000 waves, the power of the Great Way didn't actually increase. It was still a little more than 500,000 waves and even showed signs of weakening. Han Fei even thought that as he became stronger, the effect of the Great Way would become less and less. Now it seemed that this was not the case. After all, it was just that he didn't understand his own Great Way. Running the Great Way, the power of the Great Way was close to 900,000 waves. How terrifying was that? Han Fei felt that in the chaotic ocean, he was invincible in the sea expansion realm. Who said that strength couldn't be used as a standard to measure combat power? Now his strength was several times that of the top 10 powerhouses in the chaotic ocean. Why couldn't he crush them? Of course, Han Fei was not happy for long. When he wanted to summon the Jasper Stone Bridge again, he found that the Jasper Stone Bridge couldn't be summoned. Although it was shaking, it didn't appear. Han Fei suspected that it might have something to do with the collapse of the Great Way of Yin-Yang. But Han Fei couldn't help wondering whether the Great Way of Yin-Yang had collapsed or integrated into the Jasper Stone Bridge. Unfortunately, these could only be studied later. Now, when Han Fei looked at the countless reflections of himself in this mirror space, an idea suddenly occurred to him. Just like when he was on the Jade Bridge, his reflection had merged with him, and it could be considered as a fusion of the two. So, how could he make the reflections in this mirror come to him? Han Fei activated the Gemini Divine Technique, and his whole body turned into a black and a white mist. The purest original form of the Gemini Divine Technique was the current form of mist. Although the body of black mist couldn't be projected, the body of white mist could. The body of white mist directly stuck to a square mirror, completely sealing all four sides of the mirror. The mirror image extended infinitely, turning the entire mirror image space into a blended white mist. Han Fei's heart skipped a beat. He opened his eyes abruptly and found that he was already standing on the altar. Phew! At this time, Han Fei's back was covered with cold sweat, and his forehead was also covered with fine beads of sweat. This test was really too weird. If he wanted to pass it, he had to rely on enlightenment. His enlightenment was actually indirectly guided by the nautical panorama. Otherwise, who the hell could have thought of this? Without the Great Way of Yin-Yang, the Jasper Stone Bridge, and the Gemini Divine Technique, how could he get out of that damn place? While Han Fei felt lucky, he was also vigilant. This imperial palace was too difficult to break through. Every corner was dangerous. Fortunately, he was out now. Han Fei immediately looked at the bronze mirror. When Han Fei looked at the bronze mirror, he seemed to feel that he seemed to have missed something. But he didn't care and walked to the center of the altar excitedly. Chapter 2000. When Han Fei approached the bronze mirror, information appeared in his eyes. Name: Infinity Mirror, Replica. Introduction: This mirror is a replica of the Yin-Yang Clear Sky Mirror. It can reflect the enemy and take them into the Infinity Mirror to trap the enemy. The way to destroy the Infinity Mirror is to have the power to surpass the confinement of this mirror, or find a way to break the realm. The Infinity Mirror is only effective on the same realm and can only trap one person at a time. If you are trapped for a long time, you will be mirrored after 3 years. Qualities: low-quality divine weapons, spirit attached, none effect, infinity trapping mirror, recastable, unrefined. Remarks: because it is a replica, its function is very simple. Hiss: Han Fei couldn't help taking a breath. A low-quality divine weapon? A replica? If this is a replica, how strong is the authentic one? Han Fei's heart trembled. Sure enough, fortune and misfortune go hand in hand. Although the function of this infinity mirror was indeed relatively simple. However, just this single function was terrifying enough to make one's hair stand on end. What would ordinary people do if they were trapped in this mirror? They would probably try to break the realm as soon as possible. Han Fei couldn't help imagining the scene. It was really like every place was reflecting attacks at you. If you dared to use all your strength, you could be beaten to death by yourself. As for finding a way to break the mirror, well, he also had an epiphany before he figured out the way to break the mirror. Even so, Han Fei felt that he was already very smart. If someone else was in here, they might have already killed him. Therefore, no matter whether this infinity mirror was a replica or not, for now, its function was so powerful that it could even trap the time spell, which was already a divine skill. Han Fei was ready. No matter what, this mirror had to recognize him as its master. If he was afraid that his qi and blood were not enough, he had plenty of opportunities to make his qi and blood soar. Therefore, Han Fei pressed the infinity mirror with one hand, and his essence blood flowed out. However, to Han Fei's surprise, the loss of essence blood was not so exaggerated. Only 60% of it was lost, and this low-quality divine weapon was subdued by him without any hindrance. With a thought, Han Fei put away the infinity mirror, and thousands of spiritual fruits appeared around him. They crumbled one after another and were sucked into Han Fei's body to produce pure essence blood. At this point, Han Fei felt that he had passed through the insect-tide forest. The reason why the nautical panorama was pointing here was most likely because it had obtained the most benefits this time, so it chose this path. However, could this path be called a dead end? Han Fei didn't think it was a dead end for sure, but there was a slim chance of survival. Even he had to put in so much effort, how could it be easy for others? Han Fei couldn't imagine that if the other party was trapped in the mirror for 3 years, they might be mirrored and turned into a mirror. Han Fei thought of the mirrors he saw in the Mirror of Infinity and hoped that they were not what he thought. If they were all transformed from human beings, it would be too creepy. After a while, when Han Fei had replenished his qi and blood, he didn't rush to continue exploring the Imperial Palace. First, he had just experienced so much. To be honest, he needed some time to digest it. Second, he still had some questions about the Green Jade Bridge. He wanted to wait 2 days to see if the Green Jade Bridge had stabilized and if he could go in again. And today, he still had one more chance to use the nautical panorama. Han Fei asked in his heart, "Is there any opportunity suitable for me here?" However, the nautical panorama didn't move, and Han Fei didn't care. Because he had already gotten a lot of opportunities. More than 1 million kilograms of Earth Vein Essence and the Infinity Mirror, just these 2 things made this trip to the Imperial Palace worthwhile. 3 days later, the Green Jade Bridge still couldn't be summoned, but Han Fei tried to use the power of Yin and Yang. This power could be used normally and there was no problem. In this case, Han Fei didn't wait any longer. After all, the danger here was no longer a danger for him. The originally violent insect tide had now changed back to the appearance of a forest. Those insects disguised themselves as flowers, plants, and trees. Since there was no opportunity for him, Han Fei didn't try again. Was he going to find poison to eat? As for how to leave, this was also simple. The existence of the altar seemed to be for teleportation. After Han Fei took out the Infinity Mirror, on the ground of the altar, lines of an array appeared. Although it was not the teleportation array he often used, Han Fei could still tell the structure of the teleportation array. However, the place that the teleportation array couldn't understand was more like a kind of specific coordinate and place. Therefore, Han Fei guessed that this was a directional teleportation array, and the place it was teleported to should not be simple, because if he wanted to teleport there, he needed to carve more complex array patterns. Since he was already here, he naturally had to enter the teleportation array whether he wanted to or not. Or he could sit cross-legged on the altar for 3 years. Of course, this was impossible. Therefore, Han Fei didn't hesitate to light up this teleportation array with spiritual energy. As soon as the teleportation array lit up, a void entrance under the entire altar was opened. As the dense light rushed out, Han Fei's figure suddenly disappeared without a trace. When Han Fei's surrounding environment just lit up, he only felt that he was surrounded by golden light, and the gorgeous light almost blinded his eyes. When Han Fei took a closer look, he found that this was really a real palace, a hall full of jewels. Inside the hall, the dome was inlaid with gold and jade, all kinds of jade essence treasures, pearls, and demon cores were inlaid with the entire dome of the palace, and the surrounding walls and pillars were also covered with rare strange iron, mysterious crystal, gold beads, jade, and glittering diamond powder. Han Fei was standing at the entrance of the hall. Behind him was a golden gate, and in front of him was a large ship more than 80 meters long that was made of precious materials. On this entire ship, the lowest level was the demon bead of a venerable realm sea monster. Outside of the ship, there were also statues of golden corpses and their spiritual beasts that were charging at the front lines. However, whether it was a human or a spiritual beast, they were all golden, but they were all just a kind of sculpture, but they were too exquisite. The reason why it was exquisite was that even if you covered a mummy with gold and all kinds of jewelry, you would still feel that the mummy was quite exquisite. In any case, to sum it up in a single sentence, this palace was dazzling with gold and jade, and every single object was dazzling and priceless. Of course, he still couldn't perceive it. But Han Fei heard someone shout, "Who is it?" Han Fei frowned. Someone? It seemed that he had met someone. But anyway, Han Fei wasn't afraid that they were emperors. If they were his opponents, he would kill them together. However, when Han Fei passed this big ship, he saw from a distance that there were 3 people here. One of them was Qiu Yueming of the Glass Heaven. Although he didn't fight with her before, he had met her a few times. When Qiu Yueming saw Han Fei, she was also shocked. Han Fei was also here. Han Fei looked at the other 2. They actually knew each other. They were introduced to him by Bingxue Chuling when he went to the land of the King Grave. A woman holding a flute was Liang Yin, the palace master of the Fanning Heaven. And the thin but spirited man was Su Lian, the palace master of the Refining God Heaven. These 3 people obviously didn't show any hostility at the moment, which showed that they were quite friendly and had no intention of fighting. However, when Liang Yin and Su Lian saw Han Fei, they were shocked and immediately became vigilant. Now that this ferocious man was here, would he attack them? Although they hadn't experienced Han Fei's strength, it didn't mean they didn't know. This was a guy who had snatched the Yin Yang Heaven and the Shuemu Heaven from Bei Luochen. This was a terrifying person who dared to rob the Taiqing Palace and successfully forced He Daoyuan back. This was also a peerless genius who could dominate the Pioneer Sea realm in just a few decades. However, in their hearts, Han Fei was ruthless and straightforward. He was the type who always went straight to the point. Look at the Avalon of 5 elements, the Medicine King Heaven, and the Dream Weaver Heaven. Which one of them hadn't been messed up by Han Fei? After Han Fei saw them, he looked at a throne not far behind them. On that throne, a jade-like skeleton was lying. The skeleton was adorned with gold, silver, rubies, sapphires, and emeralds. There was a 6-colored wreath on its head and a gorgeous robe that seemed to be supported by some kind of golden thread. It looked like an emperor. In front of the throne was a bronze platform. From left to right, there were some rare treasures on it. There were sea-quelling bizarre treasures, exotic gems, supreme-grade spirit fruits, and strange talismans. Han Fei couldn't help but ask, "Is this the so-called Di Zun?" Han Fei took a step forward and approached the 3 people. Su Lian and Liang Yin were in a defensive stance. Qiu Yueming said, "Don't come close." Han Fei tilted his head and nodded at Qiu Yueming. "Did you guys come here directly?" Then, Han Fei looked at Su Lian and Liang Yin and smiled. "Don't worry. As long as you're not an enemy of the Yin Yang Heaven, I won't do anything. I'm not as bloodthirsty as the rumors say." Su Lian cupped his hands. "Greetings, Master of Yin Yang Heaven." Liang Yin said, "Greetings, Taoist Han Fei. I've already been to 3 dangerous places before coming here. This is the 4th. Su Lian said, "This is the 2nd place I've been to since coming here." Qiu Yueming said, "I've also been to 3 dangerous places before coming here. Later, you'll hear a voice asking for a rare treasure. As long as the treasure meets the person's requirements, he'll let you go." Chapter 2001. Han Fei's lips twitched. Looking at the skeleton that was half lying on the splendid throne, he was lost for words. "You're giving it to her?" Everybody nodded. Han Fei asked, "What if I don't give it to her?" Liang Yin said, "So far, it seems that we can only leave this place if we give her what she wants." As soon as Liang Yin finished speaking, a voice rang out from the void. It was a woman's voice. The voice said, "Temple of Greed, stop. You can leave after offering your wealth and treasures." Han Fei looked around and finally confirmed that the source of the sound was the skeleton. Su Lian said, "This sound will appear once every 2 hours." Han Fei's first thought was to ask, "You 3 kings are here. Why didn't you work together to take care of this guy?" Qiu Yueming and the others looked at Han Fei. Was this what bandits did? They wanted to kill the guardians of the palace as soon as they arrived. Were they born to be rebellious? But Su Lian said, "I came here first and searched every corner, but I didn't find a way out." Qiu Yueming said, "After I arrived, I proposed to attack the skeleton on the throne. However, we tried, but we were blocked by an invisible barrier and given a warning." Han Fei asked, "A warning?" Qiu Yueming said, "The first attack is just a verbal warning. The second attack will double the price. Han Fei asked, what about the third time? Liang Yin said, she will offer all her treasures, including those that have been recognized as her master. Han Fei was instantly amused. But you'll give her what she wants? You won't give her anything, will you? Han Fei didn't think that he would give her anything regardless of whether they did or not. This was an imperial palace, but so what? Unless this person was the real imperial emperor, it was impossible for her to ask for anything from him. Han Fei firmly believed that this person couldn't be an imperial emperor. Judging from her extremely luxurious clothes, she was clearly a female skeleton who loved vanity and corruption to the extreme. Look at the decoration style of the entire hall. Even the fucking floor tiles were made of gold and jade. To be honest, Han Fei was tempted as soon as he entered this place. Especially the ship behind him. He really wanted to stuff it into the Origin Sea and make it his spoils of war. Qiu Yueming nodded. I did, but she didn't want it. Qiu Yueming explained, this skeleton seems to be able to judge the grade of the offering. Normal offerings won't be accepted at all and will be repelled. Han Fei was amused. She spoiled him so much. The three kings thought that Han Fei would attack and destroy this place. As a result, Han Fei flipped his hand and the nautical panorama appeared in his hand. The moment the navigator appeared, the three kings all looked at the navigator in Han Fei's hand and couldn't help but speculate. Han Fei asked, where is the emperor of the imperial palace? Han Fei asked this because he was afraid that the skeleton was the only way to find the emperor. If the navigator pointed at the skeleton, should he sacrifice it or not? Sure enough, the nautical panorama did not point. Han Fei smiled disdainfully and immediately said, where are the heaven-opening state experts in this palace? Including those who have died. Crack, crack, cracked, the navigator began to spin. The 5 wheels only turned slightly a few times and then pointed at the skeleton wearing all kinds of gorgeous jewelry. Han Fei couldn't help but grin. It's just a heaven-opening state expert. If you were alive, you'd be terrifying. But you've been dead for so long. Do you still think you're important? At this time, Qiu Yueming and the other two looked at the navigator in Han Fei's hand in surprise and then at Han Fei in shock. Su Lian said, has this thing really been made? Han Fei didn't care about Su Lian and the other two's surprise. He took out the multidimensional navigator in front of them to show them. With their strength, so what if they saw it? Besides, neither the refining god heaven nor the Sanskrit heaven was his enemy. Showing the navigator meant that he wanted them to surrender to him. Since Han Fei was sure that this skeleton was just a heaven-opening state expert, he had no scruples. According to common sense, Han Fei felt that he had surpassed the limit of the sea-opening state. If he didn't use a secret method and just relied on his own strength, Han Fei felt that it was almost impossible for his pure strength to reach 500,000. Even if it was 300,000 yuan, it was already very rare. Even when Han Fei fought Han Xian, he didn't feel that kind of suppression. Although the sea-opening state didn't depend on strength itself, his Tao was not weak either. Moreover, his great Tao had improved further. If he were to unleash his full strength, perhaps he could display a terrifying strength of over 1,000,000 waves. Perhaps just one of his fists would be enough to crush a sea expansion expert. Han Fei leaped with golden light as if he was going to ignore the so-called barrier and go directly to the front of the skeleton. But then, the terrifying impact directly made the whole palace tremble for a while. Han Fei was speechless. What could block his golden light leap now? Unfortunately, this barrier had been set up for too long, and he couldn't go around it in the river of time. Han Fei's body was only a little numb, but he soon recovered. But in the palace, there was an echo. Warning! The power of heaven must not be violated. If you do it again, the wealth and treasures offered will be doubled. Han Fei grinned. Doubled? Han Fei took out the embroidery needle and activated his Tao. In an instant, he burst out with all his strength and smashed it at the nearest 2 pillars inlaid with gems and various demon essence crystal jades in this palace. And the target of the embroidery needle was the skeleton of the rich emperor wearing gold and silver. Even if this imperial palace was extremely hard, it was not so hard that even Han Fei couldn't shake it. Otherwise, didn't it mean that even an ordinary bead here had reached the point where even a heaven-opening state expert couldn't break it? With the level of this arch palace, how could it be for an imperial emperor to live in? It should be for a divine spirit to live in. Sure enough, these two pillars suddenly exploded, and a large number of rare treasures scattered all over the ground. And to Han Fei's shock, these damn pillars were also full of all kinds of dazzling and gaudy treasures. Han Fei even saw a lot of mysterious yellow stones. In addition to the mysterious yellow stones, Han Fei felt that there were a lot of gems and crystals here, which seemed to be able to be used to refine rare treasures. Apart from other things, the resources produced by these two pillars were as much as 100,000 scattered gems of various colors, which could be used as 100,000 keys to the imperial palace. Gu Qiu Yueming and the other two were dumbfounded. Lunatic, this is absolutely a lunatic. Can you be so unscrupulous just because that skeleton is a heaven-opening state expert? What do you think a heaven-opening state expert is? At this time, Han Fei's rod didn't stop. It swept around and finally smashed at the place where the skeleton was. Clang, rumble, the terrifying power made Qiu Yueming, Su Lian, and Liang Yin slide on the ground and be pushed to the corner by the rolling airwaves. The three of them even had to wear battle suits, hold shields, and circulate the Great Tao in order to be able to safely block the remaining power of the attack. Crack! At this moment, in the eyes of Qiu Yueming and the other two, the invisible barrier was full of cracks. It was like a white crack had appeared out of thin air. This meant that Han Fei's rod had almost smashed the invisible seal of the corpse. Besides, just from the remaining power, they didn't know how powerful Han Fei was now. Even though Qiu Yueming had seen the battle between Han Fei and Feng Xinlan, she didn't expect that Han Fei could grow to such a level in just a few decades. Before, she didn't believe the rumor that Han Fei could compete with a heaven-opening state expert. Now she had no reason not to believe it. Seeing that the barrier wasn't broken, Han Fei flipped his hand and put away the various gemstones and mysterious yellow stones that were scattered all over the ground. He sneered, "It has always been me robbing others, no one has ever robbed me before. What can you do to me?" As expected, this time, the rich skeleton didn't say anything. It seemed that warning was meaningless. The golden skeleton on the throne, who was half lying on the throne, slowly stood up. The precious jewelry on her body made a jingling sound. Following that, the king saw that the skeleton's eyes were burning with blue soul flames. A voice sounded in the palace, "Those who take my treasures, die." The golden skeleton slowly stood up. In front of and behind her throne, among the jewelry on the ground, some demon essence crystal flew up and attached to her skeleton. Han Fei couldn't have felt better. The 10 skeleton fingers that looked like withered branches were suddenly covered with more than 20 rings of colorful gems. From her wrist to her arm, bracelets made of all kinds of materials were jingling, such as mysterious sky jade, blue light chalcedony, red fire glazed crystal, and so on. There were more than 100 of them. On this person's neck, necklaces of all kinds of colors were hanging. A crown appeared on his head, and the crown was inlaid with an unknown gem the size of a goose egg. Anyway, he was rich. Chapter 2002. Did it come back to life? Han Fei didn't panic. Holding the embroidery needle, he secretly mobilized the chaotic energy. It seemed that he would have to fight. Compared with the insect-tide forest and the mirror space, Han Fei preferred this kind of test that could be passed only by fighting. After all, he had a chance to win the battle, but the insect-tide forest and the mirror space, to put it bluntly, if he didn't understand it, he wouldn't be able to get out. If he didn't understand it within 3 years, he wouldn't be able to get out. How could it be like now, where a huge amount of resources were waiting to enter his pocket? As long as he killed this tycoon skeleton, he would be able to do so. Qiu Yueming and the other two finally saw Han Fei's behavior clearly. He was simply a lunatic who started fighting without any hesitation. Now, the skeleton had come back to life and filled its flesh with the treasures and mystic crystals. Han Fei sneered, That skeleton, I advise you to let me go, and I can leave you some wealth. Otherwise, don't blame me for taking your entire palace for myself. Chilla, the skeleton bounced up from the throne. When it passed through the invisible barrier, it underwent a strange change. It turned into a beautiful woman with a head of red hair, a beautiful face, and a voluptuous body. She was dressed in luxurious clothes. However, no matter how she changed, she couldn't change her rich temperament. The woman floated to Han Fei in a flash and pressed her palm at him. Han Fei felt that his body was slightly stiff, and his skin seemed to be covered with some kind of golden jade substance. Ha! You're the first one to steal someone's treasure. Qiu Yueming and the other two were dumbfounded. They leaned against the wall, wondering why it was so weird. They had never been to this palace before. This was their first time here, and it was weirder than any palace they had ever seen. In particular, when they saw with their own eyes that a skeleton turned into a beauty and attacked Han Fei, they were even more horrified. It looked as if Han Fei had been frozen. Humph! The third eye between Han Fei's eyebrows suddenly opened, and his heart beat crazily like thunder. Then, at the last moment, Han Fei launched a counterattack and the sacrificing punch burst out. The terrifying power suddenly broke through a million waves. Under such a violent force, Su Lian and the other two had to use a small part of their strength to resist the impact. Under the impact of such a violent force, the jeweled ship, which was inlaid with gold and jade, began to slide, directly crashing into a certain wall of the palace. Rumble, bang, Han Fei was pushed back more than 1,000 meters by the slap and hit a pillar. The huge inertia directly shattered the pearl. But Han Fei completely withstood such a blow. On the other hand, the skeleton beauty was not unscathed under Han Fei's punch. She leaned back, and her body was like a feather, lightly sitting on the throne again. Ha! Very strong man, I know what is the most precious treasure in your body. Naturally, it is that invincible heart in your heart. Han Fei grinned. You want my heart? Old hag, you're already a skeleton. Do you think you're worthy of my heart? Buzz, a ripple spread out from the throne, and the beautiful woman's expression turned cold. Who are you calling an old hag? Han Fei smiled. I'm calling you an old hag. You've already become a skeleton, but you're still pretending to be young. Even if you take all the treasures in the world, you can't restore your appearance. You're already dead. With a scream, the beautiful woman shouted, I'm going to swallow your luck, destroy your Tao, and make you a collection among these treasures. The beautiful woman waved her hand, and on the bronze platform that was originally used for sacrifice, many treasures burst out and rushed at Han Fei. Dharma form, heaven and earth. In front of Han Fei, a Dharma form giant condensed, and Han Fei suddenly appeared on the giant's head, shouting, sacrificing, fist mark. Boom, boom, boom. Han Fei ignited the chaotic energy and fought with the Dharma form. He burst out with all his strength, and even if he punched out with his terrifying power, it would be resisted by the void. The whole palace began to shake, and the ultra-quality divine weapons and sea-quelling bizarre treasures were all blown away under Han Fei's crazy blow. Since he came to the imperial palace, Han Fei didn't intend to hold back his strength. Unlike others, he wasn't going to stop after exploring a small part of the palace. Danger was often accompanied by opportunities. The stronger the enemy, the greater the opportunity. If he looted all the treasures in this palace, his origin sea would be full of rare treasures and Xidigarba ores. Just for this, Han Fei wouldn't give up. Han Fei had even prepared a 5-fold Tao pattern pill. He didn't believe that a skeleton of an emperor could exert a lot of power. When those rare treasures and divine weapons were blown away, one of the arms of the Dharma form body was also completely destroyed. But as Han Fei tilted his head, the giant arm was regenerated. Han Fei roared, since you're already dead, I'll send you to the Western Paradise. Han Fei's Dharma form attacked. With a strike of 2 fingers, the Tao integration sword almost shattered the void here. But Han Fei didn't expect the space here to be so solid. Anyway, when the Tao integration sword burst out, even the skeleton had to put on a serious face. What a powerful man. I like him. but I have a lot of treasures here. As a matter of fact, the beautiful woman stretched out her hand, and a golden battle shield appeared in front of her. Clink, hum, thvim in the palace, a large number of rare treasures shattered and fell. The brilliance of the explosion enveloped the entire palace. Puff, puff, puff. Qiu Yueming, Su Lian, and Liang Yin vomited a mouthful of blood under the sudden impact. They were shocked. Is this Han Fei's power? What kind of power is this? He can already fight against a heaven-opening state overlord? Qiu Yueming was fine. When he knew Han Fei's identity, he knew that they were allies. As for Su Lian and Liang Yin, because they were both masters of the immortal palaces in the outer regions, they had been ruled by the Grand Pure Wuji for so many years. Although they didn't completely rely on the Grand Pure Wuji, they would still ask for help when they encountered difficulties. Now that Yin Yang Heaven had returned, the old grudge between Yin Yang Heaven and the Grand Pure Wuji was inevitable. There would be a battle between Yin Yang Heaven and the Grand Pure Wuji sooner or later. As far as they knew, the 4 palaces of the Sword God, the 9 Palace Heaven, the Yin Yang Heaven, and the Waterwood Heaven were on the side of Yin Yang Heaven. Considering the Sword God and Han Fei's current strength, it seemed that he was really qualified to compete with the Grand Pure Wuji. Su Lian and Liang Yin couldn't help but let their imaginations run wild. If Han Fei could return safely, the structure of the 36 Xian heavens of the human race would probably change. Apart from everything else, Han Fei's personality alone was enough to start a war with the emperor. They had never seen such a reckless person who would start a war with an emperor just because of a disagreement. The Dao Convergence sword burst out, and Han Fei sneered, because the Yin-Yang reincarnation knife also burst out. Han Fei didn't know if it was his illusion, but the beautiful woman seemed to have aged a lot. She saw a steady stream of new treasures attached to her body, and her appearance returned to her original appearance. Han Fei was intrigued. Did these treasures give her power? With a flash of golden light, Han Fei was already standing on the big ship full of treasures, and the Origin Sea forcibly collected the treasure ship. The beautiful woman was anxious. In the blink of an eye, she was in front of Han Fei. Han Fei stretched out his hand, and the time in front of him slowed down. When the beautiful woman pressed her palm down, a golden light flashed, and Han Fei disappeared with the big ship. Once again, he felt a powerful force comparable to the Dao Convergence sword burst out. That invisible barrier. A gap was cut open by Han Fei's sword. As long as there was a gap, Han Fei could enter. Anyway, when the beautiful woman looked back, Han Fei was already sitting on her throne. Around him, there were a lot of treasures, including the throne. They were forcibly grabbed by Han Fei. No one is allowed to deprive the master of his wealth. 10,000 treasures return, heavenly treasure cage. As soon as Han Fei collected these resources, he suddenly found that countless golden chains appeared in the void around him, directly locking him in. As for the beautiful woman, she tossed out a milky white pearl. That pearl seemed to be able to arouse the greed of others. Even Han Fei was a little stunned when he saw it. However, this was a battle. While Han Fei felt that the pearl was a rare treasure, he also felt that he was facing great danger. If he was shot, the consequences would be unpredictable. Han Fei's eyes narrowed slightly. At this time, he naturally had no chance to break the cage. He immediately shouted, and the Gemini Divine technique suddenly broke out. With a flash of golden light, the black mist body directly stepped into the long river of time and escaped from the time node that had just been opened. And Han Fei didn't care about the other half of the white mist body. He just wanted to kill the beautiful woman. At this moment, when the white mist body was blown up by a blow, Han Fei suddenly appeared behind the beautiful woman. Han Fei launched the immortal killing chi and launched his strongest blow. Bam, 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 f, f, f. Su Lian and the other 2 vomited blood. The space was too narrow, and they were almost fighting against someone at the heaven-opening realm. They never thought that they would encounter a battle of the heaven-opening realm in such a reasonable way. The 3 of them only felt that if they didn't die this time, they would already be thankful. Yes, now Han Fei's strength was completely recognized by them as the heaven-opening realm. Chapter 2003. At this moment, Han Fei didn't dare to be careless in front of someone at the heaven opening stage, even though the opponent was just a corpse. At the last moment, he sacrificed his body of white mist in exchange for a chance to escape from time and launched a wave of divine killing intent at the corpse. The moment the divine killing intent touched the beautiful woman, it exploded twice in an instant. This was the crafty time technique that Han Fei had learned. Rumble, Liang Yin and the others were forced to huddle together. The three of them worked together to resist the remaining power of the divine killing intent. They were all speechless. Could Han Fei be stronger? In the explosion, the whole palace was shaking and countless treasures and mystic crystals fell. Although the beautiful woman was indeed powerful, she was hit by the divine killing intent twice in a row. Besides, Han Fei's strength was completely different from before he entered the palace, so the terrifying power directly shattered the beautiful woman. Countless treasures fell off, and her body returned to the state of a skeleton. At this moment, Han Fei felt that the strength of the corpse was declining rapidly. Looking at the corpse, it still wanted to grab the scattered treasures. How could Han Fei let her do that? The corpse had treasures, which meant it had power. In an instant, Han Fei split into hundreds of clones and quickly swept the scattered treasures. Han Fei shouted, "You three, help me collect resources. Don't let any treasures fall into the hands of this corpse." Qiu Yueming and the other two chose to take action without hesitation. It seemed that Han Fei had won. Besides, Han Fei's super explosive power wasn't something they could resist at all. So, at this moment, they could do nothing but obey Han Fei's orders. Now that the four of them worked together, the speed of collecting resources was very fast. Anyway, Han Fei had already started fighting and even won. There was no reason for them not to help. Besides, Han Fei obviously didn't want to kill them. He even showed them such a magical thing as the nautical panorama. His meaning was very clear. He was warning them that if they could get out of here alive, they'd better stand on the Yin-Yang Heaven's side. Because the Yin-Yang Heaven controlled the way to leave the chaotic vast sea. At this moment, the scattered resources in the field were gathered almost instantly. The skeleton did not obtain many treasures, so it was unable to recover. But just when Han Fei was about to chase after it, the skeleton suddenly turned back to look at Han Fei and let out a shrill roar from its throat. "You stole my treasure. I curse you. I curse all the treasures in this world. I curse you. I curse you. I curse you. I curse all the treasures." The skeleton spewed out a huge amount of black mist, which turned into strange runes that filled the sky and drilled into these treasures. Han Fei retreated quickly and immediately shouted, "Apocalypse divine technique." Buzz. When the divine radiance descended and swept through the area, a large number of incantations were purified. Su Lian and Liang Yin looked at each other. Although they already knew that Han Fei could perform the apocalyptic divine technique, it was the first time they saw it at such a close distance. Liang Yin thought to herself, it was indeed the heaven awakening divine art. The power of this curse was purified just like that. Su Lian's eyes twitched. It seemed that if he could return this time, he would have to think about who was worth following. People like Grand Pure Wuji were actually just overlords who ruled a region, but they had a strong foundation. But people like Han Fei were so talented that no one could see through his potential at all. No one knew how strong he could become. Crack, crack, crack. After the huge amount of incantations broke out, the skeleton collapsed into a pile of broken bones, no longer having that queen-like demeanor from before. Han Fei breathed a sigh of relief and circulated the spiritual energy in his body. After a short recovery, he was fine. The collapse of the body of white mist only required 500 years of vitality. After he became a king, the recovery requirement of the Gemini divine technique became higher, so he needed 500 years of vitality. If it were in the past, in fact, it would only take 200 years of vitality to recover. Of course, for this trip to the Imperial Palace, Han Fei had prepared 20,000 years of vitality. What was a mere 500 years? When Han Fei recovered, he activated his spiritual energy. Like a big shovel, the infinity water directly began to dig the ground. The floor tiles on the ground, the wall tiles, the treasures on the dome, Han Fei didn't let go of any place where there were treasures. After this round of cleaning, Han Fei made a lot of money. Han Fei had obtained more than 10,000 mystic yellow stones, countless demonic essence of various colors, and a large number of mystic crystals and strange stones. In terms of value, many of them could be used to refine rare treasures in the Nirvana Sea. But as minerals, they were all extremely precious and could greatly enrich the Origin Sea. There were no mines in the Origin Sea. Besides, in addition to these, the old turtle reminded him, collect more of this ring. Han Fei was slightly taken aback and looked at an ordinary-looking ring, which was one of the many rings worn by the skeleton just now. This ring was white and seemed to be made of some kind of shell. When Han Fei sensed it, he found that the shell space was more than 800 kilometers wide. Yes, Han Fei was right. This thing was more than a little stronger than the Sun-Moon shell. It was definitely a top-level spatial treasure. Han Fei was surprised. What kind of ring is this? The old turtle said, if I'm not mistaken, it should be made of star shells, and it's the best among them. Star shells? Han Fei found a lot of resources in this ring. And this discovery made him even more tempted. It turned out that there were as many as 30 million ultra-quality spiritual stones, several sea-quelling bizarre treasures, tens of millions of kilograms of spiritual spring, and nearly 1 million black yellow stones. There were also all kinds of treasures and materials, huh? Suddenly, Han Fei found that there was a bottle of strange liquid sealed in many layers hidden here. Han Fei's heart did a flip, and a long-lost message appeared in his mind. Thousands of races in the sea, 296202223 owner, 932564 nearby bloodlines, green water Kirin, time dragon carp, golden crow divine blood, twin yin-yang spirit swallowing fish, emperor sparrow, hexagon starfish, recommended bloodline, green water Kirin. When Han Fei saw this green water spirit awakening bloodline, he took a deep breath. So far, he hadn't encountered any bloodline that he could continue to absorb. This green water Kirin came at the right time. Although he had many bloodlines around him, none of them were useful. Han Fei was in urgent need of a bloodline. Han Fei broke the seal without hesitation and activated the bloodline swallowing technique. As soon as it was activated, Han Fei found that this time, the devouring time reached 112 years. Han Fei couldn't help but be curious. Old Yuan, have you heard of the green water Kirin? Green water Kirin? The old turtle thought for a while. Of course I have, but the green water Kirin is an auspicious beast, good at healing techniques, and has a very long lifespan. But it can't be called a divine beast, because it can't pass the hurdle of a divine beast. It can't be regarded as a prehistoric beast, because it's not good at fighting. At most, it can be regarded as an Archean mutant. I see. Han Fei had a rough idea. If it was really at the level of a divine beast, he might not be able to devour the bloodline of this green water Kirin. If it was an Archean mutant, Han Fei felt that the bloodline devouring this time could only bring him about 100,000 points of growth. However, none of this mattered. If he could become an emperor, the level of his bloodline would be further improved, and maybe his absorption speed would be faster at that time. And the essence blood of time dragon carp and hexagon starfish might also be able to be devoured. After sorting out the resources, Han Fei couldn't help but exclaim that he had gained a lot on this trip. The problem of bloodline growth had been temporarily solved. With the rare treasures and resources collected by this skeleton, his Origin Sea would become stronger. Now he just needed to continue to expand and allocate resources. Then Han Fei couldn't help but look at Qiu Yueming and the other two. With a glance from Han Fei, the three of them immediately knew what he meant and threw all the resources they just grabbed to Han Fei. Han Fei smiled. I want to ask, how did the three of you come here one after another? If 3 kings came at once, didn't you meet the kings of other clans? Liang Yin said, I met a mermaid in the Pioneer Sea realm, but we didn't fight, because our purpose was not here. Su Lian said, I didn't meet other kings, but the place where the refining god heaven came from was not far from the Brahma in heaven. We probably happened to enter the imperial palace in a similar place. Qiu Yueming said, I fought a king of the undersea human clan. And when I entered this palace, I happened to meet a few half-king human clan powerhouses. Han Fei couldn't help but ask, you met a half-king human clan powerhouse? Qiu Yueming nodded. Yes. Those people were not weak. The last place I was at was a vast forest, and there were many demon plants there. Because the place is big, it's normal that there are many exits. Han Fei nodded slightly. It seemed to be a coincidence. But Han Fei was still a bit confused as to why 4 human kings came to this place. After all, it wasn't a human race that came. But Han Fei didn't think too much about it. He took out the navigator again and pointed the imperial palace to where he was. But this place had been dug up, and nothing was left except a wasteland. Therefore, Han Fei guessed that the navigator was pointing to the void nodes. He reached out, tore open the void and reached in. Then he dug out a small token with the word greed on it, and the reverse side was carved with an array. Han Fei activated the array with his spiritual energy. Immediately, complicated array patterns appeared on the ground. Han Fei could tell that this was a random teleportation array, but the random nodes seemed to have been carved long ago. Han Fei said casually, "You owe me a favor, don't you think?" Chapter 2004. Han Fei wasn't interested in Qiu Yueming and the others. With his current strength, he was more powerful than Bei Luochen. Apart from finding opportunities, Han Fei also guessed that the test of the Void Temple would be held here. Being able to enter the Void Temple and being a nominal disciple were two different things. King Wu couldn't enter the Void Temple. So what if he suppressed the chaotic ocean all by himself? The only thing he could suppress was the chaotic ocean. But the purpose of Han Fei's trip was not to suppress the chaotic azure sea. He just wanted to enter the Void Temple. Once he entered the Void Temple, Bei Luochen and he Daoyuan would be a piece of cake. But Han Fei found that he had already gained a lot before he even found the Void Temple. After seeing Qiu Yueming and the others off, Han Fei didn't leave immediately. He couldn't be too hasty. He was wondering why there was such a temple of greed in the imperial palace. According to the strength of the skeleton, Han Fei estimated that even if Qiu Yueming and the others joined hands, they wouldn't be a match for it. Unless there were 7 or 8 kings here, and they were all at the top of the Pioneer Sea list in the chaotic ocean. 2 or 3 of them could even have the power of the heaven-opening realm. Only by suppressing the skeleton could they really deal with the Temple of Greed. But Han Fei estimated that even so, at least one of them would die. Otherwise, they would have to contribute their wealth and precious resources. From the huge amount of resources here, it could be concluded that the skeleton must have fooled a lot of people. Now, he met 2 people and a mirror. Han Fei didn't know what the relationship between the insect men and the greed skeleton was, but he wasn't sure about the mirror. However, it was hard to say for the mirror. It might just be a treasure in the Arch Palace that just happened to be in that place. But according to Qiu Yueming and the others, they all encountered several dangerous places. If everyone encountered several dangerous places, then how many dangerous places were there in the Imperial Palace? These were only places that the kings had been to. There must be many places that the venerables had gone to. There were actually a lot of opportunities in so many dangerous places. These fortuitous encounters were the main reason why so many people in the chaotic Azure Sea obtained great fortuitous encounters and even became monarchs. But with too many fortuitous encounters, it was easy for people to get lost. The Arch Palace was the residence of the Archemperor. Did one have to go through these small opportunities to obtain the truly great fortuitous encounters? Han Fei had the navigator in his hand. He felt that he was blessed by nature. No one could find the real opportunities faster than him. Therefore, Han Fei estimated that if he wanted to, he should be able to get more than others. However, just like the Temple of Greed, which was highly dangerous, it was also a place of great rewards. At the end of the day, with his strength, he would still be able to explore these places. Why wouldn't he give up such an opportunity? So, Han Fei sorted out his thoughts and immediately thought of something. 1 year, 3 years. I'll spend at most 1 year exploring the places of great opportunities. No matter what happens next, we have to find the Void Temple in the next 2 years. After making such a judgment, Han Fei resumed his visualization for a day. On this day, one was to make sure that he was in peak condition. The first was to wait for the navigator to recover its 3 usages. The second was to consume the resources in the Origin Sea with his mind. It was imperative to explore the Origin Sea. He had gained a lot from this trip and had some wealth, so he took out 500 million ultra-quality spiritual stones to explore the Origin Sea. Of course, this amount of resources was far from enough, but he was still looking for opportunities. The next day, Han Fei saw that no one came. So he activated the greed token with spiritual energy and an array appeared. But Han Fei didn't directly enter the array. Instead, he took out the navigator and said, "Find a suitable place for me to go." Han Fei paid attention to the suitable place and didn't overly pursue the opportunity itself. It was mainly because he had confirmed yesterday that this was a random teleportation or a one-to-many fixed-point teleportation. Since it was such a teleportation, the place he went was related to the time he entered. Although a place like the Temple of Greed was good, the uncertainty was too high. If Han Fei hadn't gained a deeper understanding of the great Tao in the mirror image world, his strength would have tripled again. Then, the result of facing the greed skeleton was that he probably couldn't defeat it at all. Or, even if he wanted to defeat it, he would have to use the time spell many times and use all his trump cards, such as the Eyes of Invincibility, the Dragon Transformation Technique, the 5th grade Tao Pattern Pill, and the Emperor Sparrow. Therefore, this time he came to the Temple of Greed, he just happened to win. If it was a random teleportation, it was hard to say whether he could win or not. When the navigator stopped, Han Fei disappeared in the teleportation array with a swish. Goyulu. Han Fei's eyes lit up. As soon as he appeared, he knew that he was in the sea. The water in the sea was extremely sharp, and he felt as if he were in a sea of knives. Before he had time to observe the surroundings, the aftermath of the battle swept at him. Someone's already here? Han Fei's first thought was of course one of the Qiu Yueming trio. One of them might have come here and encountered an enemy. And the enemy of human beings could only be the 100 Demons, the Seabed Human Clan, or the Mermaid Royal Family. Han Fei looked around, only to find that it was just an ordinary seabed without any special features. He leaped in the direction of the battle with a golden flash. A moment later, when Han Fei arrived, he saw that this place was frozen for thousands of kilometers and the airwaves were as sharp as knives. The Snow Maiden and a gargantuan toad beast were defending themselves against the violent waves of the sea. Seeing Han Fei, the Snow Lady was also very surprised. She didn't expect to meet Han Fei so soon. The Snow Lady said, "The seawater here is abnormal. It's as powerful as the most powerful treasure of the sea. We have to break this abnormal seawater, or we won't be able to pass." The toad glanced at Han Fei warily and smashed a wave of swords in front of it with its big claws. It said in a booming voice, "We should work together to break this fierce water. Just now, a despicable seabed human rushed through this place while we were fighting. I hope you won't do that or—" Faced with the toad's threat, Han Fei didn't care at all. He appeared in the violent waves of swords with a swish. Clank, 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 clank. Han Fei resisted the crazy attacks with his physique. When he saw the fine white marks on his body, he couldn't help but be shocked. Infinity water? Han Fei's face changed slightly. He had always felt that the infinity water had an extraordinary origin. It was a sea-quelling bizarre treasure that could grow. He didn't expect it to come from this place. The toad and the Snow Lady were shocked to see Han Fei standing in such a crazy wave of swords and knives unscathed. The Snow Lady wondered if Han Fei was going to force his way through. The toad was shocked. This person's physique is so strong. It actually stood in the middle of the terrifying waves, wave after wave. Just now, when it tried to forcefully break through, it was forcibly cut open all over its body, leaving wounds all over its body. The corners of Han Fei's mouth curled up slightly, as expected of the Imperial Palace. It's simply a huge treasure vault. He turned his hand, and the infinity water appeared in his hand. The infinity water flickered into a beam of light in the water, just like when he first saw it. In the instant that the infinity water transformed into a pillar of light, the pressure on the Snow Lady disappeared almost instantaneously. Han Fei saw that the waves that looked like cold currents were surging towards him crazily. Han Fei couldn't help but frown. If it weren't for the fact that the infinity water was crazily absorbing the essence of water, Han Fei even suspected that he had been targeted. Seeing that Han Fei was being targeted, the giant toad immediately jumped into the depths of the sea. Han Fei said leisurely, "Didn't you say you wanted to ally with me just now? Why are you running now?" The giant toad didn't even look back. "I'll ally with you when I have a chance. Obviously, the water is targeting you. Sorry." At this moment, layers of ice appeared in front of Han Fei, and the Snow Lady tried to attack him. But Han Fei shook his head slightly. "Go after the toad. If there's an opportunity, it should fall into the hands of the human race. This place can't stop me." The Snow Lady asked, "Are you really okay?" Han Fei nodded. "I'm fine." The Snow Lady glanced at the endless waves rolling over. To be honest, she really couldn't stop it. So the Snow Lady gritted her teeth and chased after the toad. Han Fei directly activated the power of the Tao, tripled his combat power, and put on a battle robe. He didn't know whether the infinity water's abnormal behavior was good or bad. But the infinity water was now his weapon and belonged to him. It wouldn't collapse, so it shouldn't be destroyed by the waves. When the sea current rushed at Han Fei, the 100 layers of arrays he had set up in front of him were all shattered. Following that, a massive amount of blade energy slashed at his body. Han Fei thought that his physique was extremely strong, but if the same place was cut too many times, blood would ooze out. Fortunately, most of the terrifying waves were drawn into the beam of light transformed by the infinity water. After half an hour, during which Han Fei cast the apocalyptic divine technique on himself, he finally made it through. When the beam of light dissipated and Han Fei saw the infinity water again, a string of information popped up. Name: Infinity Water, can grow. Introduction: in the past, an emperor comprehended the emperor's path before he died. Fearing that his knife skills would be lost, he shattered the Tao and condensed the knife water, which was called the Infinity Water. The Infinity Water implied the infinite knife intent. The Infinity Water, the strongest form, could transform into Tao, enter the soul, and cut the Tao. Quality: ultra quality sea quelling bizarre treasure spirit attached non-effect illusionary, cutting Tao not recastable, unrefined. Remark: it has barely reached the extreme state of a sea quelling bizarre treasure. Affected by the host, it can't go further. Chapter 2005. The infinity water absorbed the essence of water, but what the Snow Maidens and the others encountered was not the essence of water, but more like other types of infinity water. After the two fused, they became the infinity water, which was a supreme-grade sea-quelling bizarre treasure. In terms of how powerful a supreme-grade sea-quelling bizarre treasure was, it seemed that only Lei Qing could forge it in the entire chaotic ocean. Even if Lei Qing had forged one for others, there might not be more than 10 in the entire chaotic Azure Sea, or even 5. This time, Han Fei seemed to have picked up a bargain. He just didn't know if there was such infinity water essence ahead. If there was, the more the better. Maybe the infinity water could be promoted to the level of a divine weapon. Han Fei grinned, and with a flash of golden light, he chased in the direction where the snow girls and the toad behemoth went. In just 100 minutes, Han Fei saw a deep blue undersea cave. Han Fei pointed with the nautical panorama and went in without hesitation. As soon as he entered the black hole, Han Fei felt that the world was upside down. He turned around and appeared on a small island. Of course, like other places, he couldn't perceive anything on this small island. But the scene of devastation, the strong smell of blood, and the still violent impact of power told Han Fei that there seemed to be a fierce battle here. Han Fei stepped into the air and crossed to the center of the island. Even if a pioneer sea-state powerhouse couldn't perceive anything, He could tell the source of the battle by judging the outpouring of power. After only a dozen minutes, Han Fei flew for about 50,000 kilometers and finally came to a place with mineral veins and mountains. Before Han Fei arrived, he saw a huge figure flying over from a distance. It was so huge that it blotted out the sky and the sun. While flying, it was bleeding. Wasn't this the big toad that had just arrived first? The toad flew back first, and the snow girls also flew over, stained with blood and covered with cracks. But upon a closer look, the broken things were all ice, not the snow girl's body. The several hundred li-long toad was like a meteor. It smashed into the ground and rolled several hundred times, stirring up a vast amount of energy and causing dust to fly everywhere. When Han Fei discovered the toad naturally discovered Han Fei too. It thought to itself, how could such a terrifying torrent of ice blades with the power of the sea and endless blades be so easily cracked by a human? The toad shouted, "Dao friend, it's dangerous ahead. We have to leave quickly." Although it was reminding Han Fei knew what it was trying to do. It was obviously trying to get close to him to ease the embarrassment of being the first to escape. Han Fei said leisurely, "Who's your friend? It's better if you don't call me that." After that, Han Fei raised one hand, and a pillar of light fell. The healing divine light hit the snow lady. Only then did the latter heave a sigh of relief and say, it was originally a place with a water curtain. However, the fortuitous opportunity here had already been taken. Furthermore, a terrifying being has appeared here, and its strength is most likely at the heaven opening stage. Han Fei didn't know what to say. I've just played Sky Splitter and now I'm playing Sky Splitter again. Are you kidding me? Is the heaven opening stage so worthless now? Han Fei's face changed. Do you think I can beat someone at the heaven opening stage? A skeleton at the heaven opening stage and a living creature at the heaven opening stage were two completely different things. He killed a skeleton at the heaven opening stage by trickery. Facing a living one, unless his strength was 50% higher, he would still have the confidence to kill it. At this moment in the sky, another enormous shadow of a dragon flew across. Han Fei took a closer look, only to find that it was a big dragon with a single horn on its head. A small part of its body had been cut off, and blood was spurting out. Han Fei was speechless. Wait, how many sea opening stage cultivators are there here? The snow lady said, 7, 2 behemoths, me, a mermaid royal, a sea human, and 100 demons. There is also a king of the sea human named Lingbo. For some reason, he has already gone crazy. Our opponent is him. I'm afraid he has already opened the sky. Han Fei was puzzled. If we can't beat 6 people, why should we fight him? The snow lady said, the exit is guarded by Lingbo. We have no choice but to fight. The toad behemoth said, fellow Taoist, we should work together to open a way out. Han Fei squinted at it. Didn't you tell me to run just now? The toad behemoth said, I said, fellow Taoist. Don't go inside. That sea human is really weird. He has an invincible arm. The 6 of us are no match for him. Han Fei raised his eyebrows. So exaggerated? Although Han Fei really wanted to kill this toad, there were still many unknown factors in this imperial palace. Although this toad was a king, its strength was probably about the same as the snow lady's. Even if it went all out, it would still be no match for him. Therefore, Han Fei glanced at the toad and the snow lady. Since you want to leave, don't be afraid to fight. Let's go and have a look. Me too. As Han Fei spoke, he saw a cold-faced woman in black scale armor flying over. Her chi and blood were seriously scattered, and there was a single horn on her head. Was this the one-horned dragon that had been swept away just now? This was also a behemoth. Han Fei couldn't help but glance at the toad. Can't you turn into a human? You're so big. Are you going to be beaten like a sandbag? The snow lady said to Han Fei via voice transmission, the so-called allies are only temporary at most. Except for the behemoth clan, everyone else here is an enemy. You'd better think about whether you want to cooperate or kill them later. Han Fei nodded slightly. Of course, He wouldn't really cooperate with these guys who were originally enemies. However, some places had to be guarded. If they were all dead, he could only rely on himself in the end. Although these people might not be very strong, when they operated their respective daos and cooperated with each other, even Han Fei couldn't kill them in an instant. Swish, swished, Han Fei flew out. Only a few seconds later, he saw a burly guy with gills on his neck, webbed palms, and scales. His right arm was shining with golden light, and his whole arm seemed to be made of pure gold. Han Fei was speechless when he saw this. Shoot, it's a Qilin arm. One of the kings of the Seabed Human clan and the 100 Demons clan was shocked when he saw Han Fei. Why is this demon here? Even the Merman royal clan powerhouse's face turned cold at this moment. Han Fei's ferocity was now well known in the chaotic Azure Sea. But fortunately, Han Fei and the princess were in love, so he wouldn't make things difficult for them. Besides, Han Fei might not be able to solve the problem in front of him, so they might have to cooperate to fight later. Although the Merman royal clan and the 100 Demons clan joined forces to resist the enemy, everyone had their own plans. But as soon as Han Fei arrived, everyone had their own thoughts. The guy named Ling Bo punched out with the intent of extermination, sending the three of them flying at the same time. Under that terrifying power, the shield of the 100 Demons clan's big turtle had been shattered, and the 3 ice crystal spiritual flakes of the Merman royal clan had also been shattered. Now that Han Fei was here, everyone had hope. In fact, Han Fei's current strength was only 300,000 waves. Although he was already very strong, he had only become a king recently and he was still young. Han Fei knew that 300,000 waves was still too weak for a heaven-opening state cultivator. So he activated his Dao without hesitation. If this person was easy to deal with, he would kill the other kings later. Therefore, Han Fei activated his Dao, and the terrifying power of nearly 1,000,000 waves collided with Ling Bo's punch. Because he knew he was strong, Han Fei wasn't afraid of killing him with one punch. The latter's eyes were crazy and bloodthirsty. As soon as he saw Han Fei coming, he naturally fought back. Boom! When the fists collided, the mountains collapsed and the earth cracked. The snow maidens were going to help, but they were directly sent flying for more than 100 kilometers by the aftershock. The terrifying energy ripples directly crushed all the vegetation on this island into nothingness. Bam! A figure, like a meteor, rolled hundreds of times on the ground and was also smashed hundreds of kilometers away. When the smoke and dust cleared, he took a closer look. It was none other than Han Fei. Clatter! Han Fei retreated more than 1,000 meters, stretched his arms, and his face suddenly became solemn. At this moment, he was no longer shocked by the power displayed by the other party. But when that person punched him, he felt that his essence blood seemed to be sucked out. Suddenly, Han Fei didn't feel well, and a strange desire emerged in his heart. Get it? Get it? Han Fei's eyes were a little red, and the old turtle shouted, "Calm down, calm down." Han Fei suddenly came back to himself and couldn't help but be shocked. Did he almost lose control just now? The old tortoise said, "This emperor sensed an extremely powerful evil intent appearing in your divine soul. What happened?" Han Fei said, "There's something wrong with that hand." The old turtle said, "Needless to say, I also know that there's something wrong with that hand. It's clearly not that Ling Bo's hand, but a new one. Otherwise, I don't believe that in this chaotic ocean, there can be a pioneer sea state cultivator who can suppress you in strength. It's exactly because it's not his hand that his hand can withstand my power, but Ling Bo can't. That punch almost crushed his flesh and blood. It's impossible for him to do that on his own." The toad behemoth and the one-horned female flood dragon were also horrified at this moment. What kind of divine power did Han Fei show? This guy actually punched the monster head-on. At this moment, everyone naturally put their hopes on Han Fei. Han Fei grinned and said, "Everyone listen up. You want me to help you stop this person? Do you really think you don't need to pay anything? You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.